Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hello, hello. Good morning. I'm Joaquin Escobar, Chair of the State Water Board. Today is Wednesday, October 7th, and it is 9:30. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'll begin by introducing.
Okay, he's sounding.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're getting some. Okay, thanks. I'd like to begin by introducing my fellow board colleagues. With me today is Board Member Tam Dodak, Board Member Sean McGuire, and Board Member Laurel Firestone. I'd like to also introduce our executive staff. With us today is Executive Director Eileen Sobek, our Chief Counsel Michael Loffer, our two Chief Deputies Eric Oppenheimer and Jonathan Bishop, and the Clerk of the Board Janine Townsend, and assisting her is Margie Argel. As you all will know, this meeting is being webcast and recorded. So when you come up, please do speak clearly into, when you come up for public comment, that is, please do speak clearly into your phone or your microphone in order for us to be able to hear you well. We don't have a physical meeting room in order to comply with the governor's executive orders and COVID restrictions. And so we are here on the virtual platform. Some of you may be viewing through the webcast. If you intend to make comment today, you need to be here on the Zoom platform with us. There's instructions at the top of the agenda today on how to do that, or you can email comment letters at waterboards.ca.gov in order to be given instructions how to fill out the virtual speaker card and join us here on the platform. Everyone is muted and video is turned off currently, and when it is your opportunity to speak, you will be asked to share your video and mic. With that, we can continue on. This is a continuation from yesterday's meeting, and so we'll start with item number 7, which is a PFAS statewide investigation technical data presentation. And I want to acknowledge that this is actually a carryover from the last board meeting, last being our September 15th board meeting. We didn't end up getting to this informational item. We had a lengthy discussions on a number of our other items, and staff were very kind to be able to say, yes, we could postpone, and we're having the informational today. So really appreciate, again, that flexibility and look forward to today's discussion. With that, I'll hand it over to, looks like Erica. Oh, Annalisa, sorry.
Good morning, can you hear me okay?
You can, good morning.
Good morning, perfect. Good morning, Chair Escobar and members of the board. My name is Annalisa Kihara. I am Chief of the Underground Storage Tank and Site Cleanup Section in the Division of Water Quality, and I have the pleasure of introducing this info item on the California Water Board's per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, investigation data summary. So we did provide a programmatic update to the board around November of 2019, so a little less than a year. And since then, we have collected enough PFAS data to report on some of the observations we are seeing as we analyze the data. Next slide, please. So I'd like to introduce you to our PFAS team members who will be presenting this item to you today. We have Wendy Link, Senior Engineering Geologist, and Erica Calve, Engineering Geologist, both with the Division of Water Quality. Jeff O'Keefe, a Supervising Sanitary Engineer with the Division of Drinking Water, and Sarah Beth George, Engineering Geologist with the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. And since this is a joint water quality and drinking water presentation, I'd also like to introduce you to others that we have with us to answer any questions. Shala Farnock, Assistant Deputy Director, and Brianna St. Pierre, Senior Engineering Geologist with the Division of Water Quality. And then Darren Polhemus, Deputy Director, and Daniel Newton, Assistant Deputy Director with the Division of Drinking Water, as well as Tim Regan and David Rose with our Office of Chief Counsel. So I'll now pass it to Erica Calve, who will start us off with the presentation outline. The next slide, please.
Thank you, Annalisa. We are really happy to be here to share this presentation of the PFAS investigation results to date. Since 2019, the water boards have received and analyzed data from over 3,000 drinking water, soil, groundwater, and leachate samples. Preliminary results are showing interesting trends in the types and concentrations of PFAS analytes observed, and this presentation will primarily focus on those observations in groundwater and water supply well data. Our agenda for today includes a broad overview of PFAS and why we are concerned about this class of compounds from a human health and environmental perspective, a data summary of the source investigation following implementation of statewide orders issued in collaboration with the regional water boards, a data summary from the public water system investigations, a brief overview of the PFAS results from the statewide Ambient groundwater monitoring program, some forward-looking data analysis tools being used for fingerprinting PFAS source areas, and a summary of the investigative and programmatic actions moving forward. Next slide. We are going to dive right into an important concept that will be echoed throughout the presentation, and that is that PFAS are a very large class of compounds that have been found to be extremely persistent and they do not biodegrade in the environment, which is why some people refer to these as forever chemicals. According to the US EPA, PFAS comprises a class of more than 6,300 individual compounds that are of interest to scientists and regulators worldwide. That number of compounds is represented by the yellow box shown on the left. However, we're only able to characterize a small number of them by comparison, and this is represented by the small black box shown as an area comparable to approximately 18 to 30 PFAS that are typically included in a standard laboratory analysis. The graphic is meant to highlight the relative difference between these two endpoints and the need for more bulk total PFAS analyses as we continue down the investigation path. Before we go into more detail on the analytes that we do measure, with regard to this big gap in our characterization tools, it's useful to know that the compounds that are characterized by standard analytical methods are from two important groups within the subclass of the perfluorinated compounds. The subclass is often referred to as perfluoroalkyl acids, or PFAS for short, and the two groups that we have focused on are the perfluoroalkyl sulfonates, or PFSAs, and the perfluoroalkyl carboxylates, which are referred to as PFCAs. These fully fluorinated compounds are the ones that are, in particular, very persistent in the environment, and these ones don't biodegrade. They don't biotransform. They're dead-end daughter products. Keeping that in mind, a large portion of the yellow box is represented by a group of PFAS called the PFAA precursors. And these are compounds that do biotransform in the environment, and they form PFAAs. So even though we may not be able to measure all the PFAAs and the PFAA precursors that we're interested in, we do have the ability to evaluate presence-absence for some key PFAS groups that have been clearly associated with certain types of uses and discharge. Next slide. As noted here, initial production of PFAS began in the 1940s, but our awareness of PFAS came in the early 2000s when PFOS, or PFOS, and PFOA were coming to light as emerging contaminants. Our awareness has grown from the early 2000s from these two specific compounds to a number of really similar long chain analogs to PFOS and PFOA. These are commonly referred to as long chain PFSAs and long chain PFCAs. Long chain PFSAs and PFCAs are known to bioaccumulate with half-lives in the human body measured in years. Concerns over exposure from long-chain PFSAs and PFCAs and their precursors has led to a phase-out of these compounds between 2000 and 2010. Around the same time period, there was a transition in the industry to replacement chemistries that included manufacture of short-chain PFSAs and PFCAs and their precursors, as well as per- and polyfluoroalkyl ether compounds. We have a growing awareness of these newer compounds that are part of the PFAS class. From what we have learned of these replacement chemistries, where they were originally thought to produce less toxic PFAS than their long-chain counterparts, some studies show that there are still reasons to be concerned, meaning key analytes from these groups of PFAS have been identified as toxic, some are bioaccumulative, some are very mobile, and they are all still very persistent in the environment. So now to expand on the list of analytes that can be characterized using standard analytical techniques, we're going to call your attention to the first column next to the pyramid, which shows a rough summary of the number of PFAS analytes from each of these groups that are currently measured using US EPA method 537 This is the method accredited in California for drinking water. Where we show a plus sign, it indicates additional analytes that can be measured using a modified version of this method. And that modified method is actually also accredited in California, and we use it for the site investigations. As you can see, we're able to measure 11 long-chain PFAS and their precursors, 3 short-chain PFAS and some precursors if we use the modified method, and 4 per and polyfluoroalkyl ethers. And just to really, kind of clarify this short-chain precursors line item that shows 0+. What we mean is that we're not measuring precursors in using the standard drinking water method, but when we modify the method, we can request the laboratory to provide data on some of these important short-chain precursors that we're aware of. The current method does a fairly good job of characterizing the PFSA and PFCA groups, meaning that there are about 30 compounds within these 2 groups, not accounting for various salts and isomers and cyclic analogs, of which about 12 to 20 can be characterized using standard or modified and accredited methods. By comparison, the precursor and per and polyfluoroalkyl ethers comprise thousands of individual compounds that are currently not characterized by the standard or modified and accredited methods. It's also worth highlighting at this time that as we dive into the data evaluation portion of the presentation, we'll be referring to key groups of PFAS, specifically the long-chain PFSA and PFCAs, and the long-chain precursors will be shown as 2 groups and charted in dark orange, like it is here on the pyramid. And then short-chain PFSAs and PFCAs, short-chain precursors, and per and polyfluoroalkyl ethers are going to be grouped. And data from these 3 groups will always be shown using a similar yellow color to the one shown on this pyramid. Next slide. And now that you have these basics, it's useful to know that PFAS have historically been used in a wide range of commercial and industrial processes and products. This is due to the unique surface tension properties that they impart, including oil and water repellency, temperature resistance, and friction reduction. Shown in the upper left corner is a major use of PFAS associated with Class B firefighting foam, such as aqueous film-forming foam, also known as AFFF. PFAS are also used in certain metal plating operations, textiles, tech industry, nonstick cookware, and even in food packaging, such as what has been marketed as biodegradable clamshells that actually contain these forever chemicals. There are many other known uses not listed here, and the point is that this wide range of uses and associated discharges of PFAS to the environment has led to occurrence of PFAS globally with observed presence in very pristine environments. Next slide. And this is a major concern because certain PFAS have been shown to be bioaccumulative, and there are potential associated cancer, non-cancer, and developmental health effects. In fact, as summarized by the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, studies suggest that certain PFAS may affect growth, learning, and behavior of infants and older children, lower a woman's chance of getting pregnant, interfere with the body's natural hormones, increase cholesterol, affect the immune system, and increase the risk of cancer. Scientists are still learning about the health effects of exposure to several individual PFAS, as well as exposure to mixtures, which is really important because we typically detect more than one PFAS in any environmental media. PFAS have also been shown to be toxic to aquatic organisms. Several studies show that there are reproductive and developmental effects such as infertility, reduced survival, and reduced growth for certain aquatic species that are exposed to PFAS. And because PFAS bioaccumulate and actually biomagnify in the food chain, seabirds and marine mammals may have been shown to accumulate high concentrations of PFAS and therefore may be more impacted by PFAS in the environment. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Wendy to tell you more about the investigation results.
Morning. Thank you, Erica. PFAS was first sampled in the public water systems under the oversight of the US EPA in 2013 through 2015. It's a program that's known as the Third Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule, also known as the UCMR 3, which included 6 PFAS compounds. Our statewide PFAS investigations targeted airports because of the use of AFFF, municipal solid waste landfills because they're receivers of PFAS-containing waste, chrome plating facilities because of the universal use of PFAS-containing mistsuppressants. In coordination with the issuance of these orders, public water systems were asked to sample their wells adjacent to the airports and landfills, and those with PFAS detections from the UCMR3 study sampling event and in the vicinity of those wells. Recently, orders were issued to investigate publicly owned treatment works. They are also receivers of PFAS-containing waste and continued sampling at public water systems. In the near future, statewide investigative orders will be issued to bulk fuel terminals and refineries by the end of this year. Next slide, please. Our statewide investigative approach started in 2018 and continues today with focused efforts being performed by the regional boards and the districts of the Division of Drinking Water. The primary investigative objectives of the statewide orders are to gather information on the occurrence of PFAS in California drinking water sources and watersheds. Data will be evaluated to identify impacted drinking water wells and identify areas where additional work is needed to ensure that communities reliant on those drinking water wells are provided safe drinking water and where additional public water supply sampling would be appropriate. The data will also be used to inform additional areas where watershed-specific source identification efforts are needed and inform in future investigation requirements. Finally, the data collected will also inform the consideration of public health goals and eventually lead to maximum contaminant levels. Next slide, please. So now let's start looking at the data. And we'll start with this part. We're going to talk about the landfills first, and then we'll talk about the airport second. This is a quick summary of where we are with the landfill and airport submittals process based upon the status as of June of 2020. Approximately 84% of the landfills and 63% of the airports have met their submittal requirements, including the upload of their electronic data files to GeoTracker. There are literally thousands of sample results that have been reported to date for these two types of sites. By the end of this month, we anticipate the landfills to be about 95% complete and the airports at 70% complete, with the final sampling and analysis report submittals will be in the Water Board's hands by early 2021. The chrome plating investigation.
Sorry to interrupt, Ms. Link. Just wondering on the chrome platers at 1%, when are we kind of expecting to get at a higher number there? And is there sort of a story as to why it seems the response is so low there?
Yeah, the chrome platers were definitely affected by the state of emergency board share, the COVID night. A lot of the operators had to shut down, and so they weren't, an essential. But they are starting up again, and we have received quite a few work plans at the regional boards, and they are in the process of reviewing them. So I would expect data to start coming in the end of this year, but we probably won't see the bulk of the data until early 2021.
Okay, sounds more than reasonable. Thanks, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Just one other note on this is that, we rely on electronic data format submittals. We call them EDFs, evaluations at the statewide level and at the regional board level. So for data summaries presented on the following slides, we have only included those results of EDF submittals. As such, therefore, that the following charts provide a status as of June 2020. And they will continually be updated as additional final reports and submittals are submitted into GeoTracker. Next slide, please. So we're going to start our data analysis, and we'll talk about the landfills first. Next slide, please. So you're going to see two different types of charts, actually three different types, and we'll start with these first. You know, Erica described to you our awareness of PFAS and the pyramid showing the small areas of what we are aware of, which are the older long chain PFAS and precursors, which are the top portions of that pyramid in dark orange, and the growing amounts of unknowns with the newer short chain and precursors, and the per and polyfluoroalkyl ethers. Those are the lower portions of that pyramid that she showed you. So let's translate that into a graphical form. These are two charts presented using the frequency of detection as a way to normalize the data. Each chart shows the frequency of detection for each of the PFAS groups, as in the colored bars, same colors as in the pyramid. In this case, what you see is landfill groundwater and landfill leachate. The number of samples used in analysis is provided as the N equals number. So for example, there were 506 samples, part of this analysis for landfill groundwater. There is a significantly higher frequency of detections of PFAS in landfill leachate compared with groundwater for each of the PFAS groups analyzed, which is generally consistent with published studies and is to be expected. It is interesting to note that the relatively higher frequency of detection of the short chain PFAS replacements, of the short chain PFAS and their precursors, as it may be indicative of the abundance of the products manufactured with the PFAS replacements accumulating in our landfills. It also raises a concern as these short chain PFAS are more mobile than their long chain PFAS counterparts and more challenging to remove from water once they are discharged to the environment. The relatively higher frequency of detection of these short chain PFAS in groundwater may be associated with their mobility, though additional data analysis is needed to understand these observations more holistically. It is also noteworthy that on a case-by-case basis, the distribution of this frequency of detections will be different. For example, this data set includes some very old landfills, ones that are operating since the 1930s, and their landfill designs predate Title 27 liner and leachate system design requirements, along with landfills with a combination of both, with the older designs and some of the newest designs. In some cases, with no liner or landfill collection systems in place, we expect to see more impacts, more compounds migrating to landfill, to groundwater. So at a really high level, this chart shows us that we are generally detecting similar groups of PFAS in groundwater as in leachate, but that we have a relatively higher frequency of detection for many of these compounds detected in leachate compared to groundwater. Next slide, please. So this is a presentation of the same data except in a different format. This is an appearance of using dot plots. It illustrates the range of occurrence for the concentration data itself. The groups of PFAS are shown on the x-axis with the older long chain PFAS precursors on the left and the newer short chain precursors and per and polyfluoroalkyl ethers on the right. The dots represent measured concentrations of individual PFAS analytes within each group along the y-axis. This chart provides a quick snapshot of the types of PFAS observed in this data set, and also helps us to begin to understand if the changes in manufacturing processes are apparent in our environmental samples. And if so, begin to consider management strategies that may be appropriate given the limited understanding of transport and fate of the replacement compounds in the environment. So in this case, for landfill groundwater, concentrations for both the older and the newer short chain PFAS are very similar in range and concentration and occurrence, with maximum concentrations over 1,000 nanograms per liter or parts per trillion. The occurrence of the newer short chain PFAS precursors is also detected along with the older long chain PFAS precursors. Note that per and polyfluoroalkyl ethers were analyzed. Examples are Adana and Gen X, but they were not present in landfill groundwater, though they were analyzed at 12 of the landfills reported to date. Next slide, please. So now we're going to look at the same chart, but for landfill leachate. The range of occurrence chart for landfill leachate is very similar to the range of occurrence chart for landfill groundwater, with the exception that the maximum concentrations in leachate are a magnitude or two higher as with groundwater. And very few per and polyfluoroalkyl ethers were detected. There was only one landfill with only 3 landfills testing for these compounds. You know, these results really highlight the benefit our landfill leachate collection systems and how effective they are as a management tool to reduce constituents of concern from migrating to groundwater. Next slide, please. So in summary, let's go over some key points of observations so far that we've seen with the landfill data. There were 7 landfills that reported, there were all but 7 landfills reported PFAS in groundwater. I'm still trying to understand why only those 7 were special. While reported detections were higher in leachate, definitely than groundwater. The leachate collection systems are functioning as designed and where they are installed. Landfill designs vary between facilities, with some containing waste management units designed with engineered liners and leachate collection systems, and some without that were designed prior to federal and state design regulations. There are no obvious correlations so far that we've seen amongst them for the presence or absence of PFAS. You know, additional sampling events, analyses, and research will be conducted on the leachate and groundwater data. Site history, design, site location, and waste material types are also factors that are accepted at these facilities. We're expecting to continue to receive leachate and groundwater data from the landfills for the state through the following year. Next slide. All right, we talked about the landfills. Now we're going to move on to the airports. Next slide, please. So here we'll show our frequency detection charts for the landfills. These charts show the frequency detection for those same PFAS analyte groups for groundwater and surface water at airports and soil. As shown, there's a significantly higher frequency of detections of PFAS in groundwater and surface water samples compared with soil for each of the PFAS groups analyzed, which is not too surprising given the fact that soil sampling is essentially what you call a contact sport, and to detect PFAS in soil, one must collect a sample in the direct vicinity of the release area. Groundwater is usually a good indicator of the presence of PFAS, and these preliminary results indicate the need for further source area characterization. Also, the frequency of short-chain PFAS are nearly double the frequency of the long-chain PFAS. The use of aqueous film-forming foam, AFFF, is the primary source of PFAS found at airports due to its use for fire training and for responding to emergencies on the flight lines. The presence of long-chain PFAS is associated with the older formulations of AFFF, and the presence of short-chain PFAS can be an indication of newer formulations which still contain PFAS but are typically made with the shorter chain C6 precursors. So for example, when we look deeper into the data for the short chain precursors, we did notice that 6,2-FTS fluorotelin sulfonate was detected in over half of the groundwater samples. Next slide, please. So if we were looking at the range of occurrence chart for airport, groundwater, and surface water, the range of occurrence data in groundwater and surface water is widespread and includes some very high concentrations, some detections at 1 part per million. Keep in mind, samples collected at the airports were targeted at source areas, and the magnitude of concentrations shown here were expected. Next slide, please. So what are the key takeaways in regards to the data that we've seen so far for the airports? These investigations focused on the evaluation of known or suspected AFFF source areas, and the results confirmed that there are, in fact, areas of concern. By comparison to the landfill results, we see that concentrations of PFAS in groundwater and surface water are at least 2 orders of magnitude higher than those observed at landfills. These orders were issued to large, medium, and small-sized airports as part of a separate evaluation. That we have determined that the size of the airport does not necessarily indicate the likelihood of PFAS impacts at any given airport. But regardless of the airport size, sites have been identified with relatively elevated concentrations and are undergoing further characterization under the regional board oversight. Next slide, please. So let's highlight these data so far that we spoke about the source investigation orders. Our data summary included over 900 samples, representing up to 84% of the completed sampling and reporting. Of those samples analyzed, nearly 100% of them had a PFAS detection present in groundwater, with up to 28 different PFAS analytes being detected in any one sample. In general, we see relatively high frequency of detection of the newer short-chain PFAS analytes compared to the older long-chain PFAS analytes. And from there, I'm going to hand it off to Jeff O'Keefe to go over the public water supply data.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm Jeff O'Keefe with the Division of Drinking Water. I'd like to provide an update on DDW's actions and background on our guidance for public water systems. In April 2019, DDW issued orders to about 200 public water systems at 600 drinking water sources shown on this map. They were required to collect 4 quarterly samples for PFAS using an ELAP accredited laboratory and using the EPA drinking water analytical method, EPA 537, which analyzes for 15 or 18 of the PFAS analytes. The locations shown on this map are built upon the Division of Water Quality's orders, and we selected sites within 2 miles of an airport, 1 mile from a landfill, and 1 mile from the federal UCMR 3 sites that showed detections. Wendy mentioned UCMR 3 previously. I just want to point out that it was a limited sampling statewide, so it wasn't comprehensive, and it only analyzed for 6 of the PFAS analytes and using a higher detection level, but it's still useful for this purpose. Little background on our guidance for water systems. We establish notification levels and response levels for chemicals that lack an enforceable maximum contaminant level. For PFAS, DDW has notification levels and response levels for 2 of the chemicals, PFOA and PFAS. And in February 2020, the response levels were lowered to 10 parts per trillion for PFOA and 40 parts per trillion for PFAS. Last year, the legislature passed and the governor signed AB 756, which increased the public notification and reporting process when PFAS is detected or response levels are exceeded. Within the last month, EDW district offices issued a new order to about 225 public water systems, 890 drinking water sources at areas that had detections from this first order. And we reviewed the data from 2019 and 2020, and we selected those sites that had detections and all the surrounding area within a 1 mile radius. And those were included in the new order. The new order requires quarterly monitoring and requires the public water systems to comply with the AB 756 notification and reporting requirements. Specifically, it requires a source exceeding a response level for PFOA or PFAS based on a quarterly running annual average of results to remove or treat the source or provide a public notice to customers. Next slide, please. Next, I'll provide some analysis of the almost 3,000 sample results for drinking water sources collected in 2019 and 2020. The green bars represent the number of sources sampled in each quarter. Note there were more sources monitored than were required by the 2019 order, and this is due to proactive voluntary monitoring efforts taken by some public water systems. The yellow bars show that approximately 60% of all public water systems that monitored had a detection at least one of their sources for at least one of the PFAS analytes. This high rate of detection is due to the fact that the orders were issued to areas that we thought would be vulnerable to PFAS contamination. In contrast, the random sampling under UCMR 3 showed only about 1% detection for the 6 PFAS analytes. Next slide, please. We further reviewed the analytical results to predict the number of public water systems that may exceed a response level for PFOA or PFAS based on the data collected from the previous order. When comparing the number of public water systems exceeding the old response level, which was 70 parts per trillion for PFOA, PFAS combined, you can see the impact of lowering the response level to 10 and 40 now will have on public water systems, since they will now have to remove, treat, or provide a public notice. On the left, 3 public water systems, shown in the red dots, exceed the prior response level of 70. That was based on the EPA health advisory of 70 parts per trillion. But on the right, when we lower the response level to 10 and 40, we predict that 61 public water systems and 195 individual drinking water sources may exceed the PFOA response level of 10 parts per trillion based on a quarterly running annual average of the 2019 results. You can see the red dots are heavily concentrated in Southern California, but they also appear along the coast, Central Valley, and in Northern California as well. PFOA has a bigger impact than PFAS since the response level is lower, but we also performed the same prediction. I don't have the maps shown here, showing 33 public water systems and 77 sources would exceed the PFAS response level of 40 parts per trillion based on a quarterly running annual average of the 2019 results. And there may be some overlap where some of them exceed both the response level for PFOA and PFAS. This prediction gives an indication that as many as 94 public water systems and 272 sources may exceed the response level and would likely need to add treatment or pursue an alternative source of supply. I should point out the number may be higher than that if our new order finds new areas of contamination in the expanded area under our new order. Several public water systems have already begun planning projects to add treatment to remove PFAS. I'll turn it back to Wendy now, and she'll discuss trends in the public water system data when looking at the frequency of detection by the 4 PFAS analyte groups. Wendy?
Thanks, Jeff. Next slide, please. So here is our frequency of detection chart. So all 4 quarter sampling events that occurred in 2019 and 2020 were included in the data review. But for this chart, we're only going to show the last sampling event because since many of the same wells were sampled for all 4 events. This figure provides a high-level summary of the frequency of detections for various PFAS groups analyzed in the public water systems. As you can see, the newer short-chain PFAS are detected the most frequently, followed by the older long-chain PFAS. There were very few precursors and no per and polyfluoroalkyl ethers detected in the public water systems for the 4th sampling event. Next slide, please. So for the range of occurrence chart for the public water system wells, the range of detections in these shows generally an order of magnitude lower than the results for the landfills and several order of magnitude lower than the airports. Though the frequency of detection for long-chain PFAS are relatively low by comparison to other PFAS groups, the range of detections where they are found is similar in orders of magnitude. Next slide, please. So if we were to pull all the range of occurrence charts all together in regards to the airport groundwater and surface water data, the landfill groundwater data, and the public water supply data that we have so far, you can see that range of occurrence there. It illustrates that, you know, the public water systems were within 1 or 2 miles of the airports and land are just not reporting the same concentrations as the levels that are being reported at the airports or the landfills. Next slide, please. So when comparing the analytes reported, actually analyzed at the airports, landfills, and the public water system, highlights that there were 4 PFAS compounds that were not analyzed per EPA method 537.1, but reported at a high frequency in the airport and landfill investigations. 3 of them are short-chain PFAS analytes, and you can see them on the right side of the graph. 2 of the 3 were detected at over 50% of the time in the airport and the landfill samples. This data highlights that we do need to do some further characterization and a correlation study in order to understand the impacts of this. Other key observations on this and supported by other previous slides is that there's a higher frequency of short chain PFAS relative to longer chain as you look from right to left. There's a higher frequency of short chain on the right versus the left, and higher frequency of PFAS detected in the airport and the landfills than in the public water systems. And PFAS and PFOA are still playing a role. They are detected at 40 to 80% detections. Could be a function of degradation of the precursors or the degradation of the precursors.
Can I just ask a quick question on that? I mean, is that reflective of also the fact that the public supply wells are deeper in the aquifer than what's sampled at the airports and landfills?
Could be as well. Yes, yes.
Has there been any update in the EPA method for drinking water 537 to be able to analyze for these compounds that you're detecting at source sites?
I can take that, Jeff, and then you can follow up if that works.
Go ahead.
Sure. EPA has another method, 533, that does include some of the shorter chain compounds that are being reported in the source investigations, but it's not not all of them are the same. It's not a complete list. So 537 has some and 533 has others. If it was the combination of both, you would have, does that make sense, a longer list? But there's some overlap and some have one of the others. So Jeff, did you want to supplement that at all? Or?
No, that covers it. Thanks.
Okay.
So then going forward, as we're looking at these future investigations, and especially sites where you've already seen detections, is the plan to expand this list to at least capture as many of these compounds as you can?
I think that's what we need to do with that correlation study, board member, because we need to understand the relative risk for those as well. Even though that they're being detected, over 50% of the time, are they a risk, right? And so that's part of the study that we need to figure out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So let's just go over the summary of what we've talked so far in regards to the public water system samples. As Jeff mentioned, there's 2,900 sampling events that occurred in 2019. Approximately 60% of the water systems did report a PFAS analyte. It is possible that there'll be up to, or maybe a little bit more, 58 water systems that will report a PFO or PFAS above detection above the response level because of the lowered response levels. Of the PFAS compounds analyzed, 9 of them were reported in the public water system, the airports, and the landfills, while there were 2 compounds that reported in over 50% of the airport and landfill samples, but were not part of EPA method 537. Next, I'm going to provide a brief summary of the ambient groundwater study that's occurring in the state by the State Water Board. Next slide, please. So the ambient groundwater GAMA priority basin project started in 2002. PFAS was added in summer of 2019. Domestic and public water systems were part of that sampling effort. There's currently 70 samples collected as part of that project. This is a statistical approach, a non-biased approach that's being conducted by the USGS. Of those 70 samples, we looked at those, and data indicates that there's less than a 5% frequency of detection for the long or the short chain PFAS. And there were absolutely no precursors or per and polyphenol alkyl ethers detected in the study so far. Next slide, please.
Sorry, just a question on that. Was that both in the shallow groundwater aquifers and in the deep groundwater aquifers, or are those statistics focused on the other?
I believe I think it's mostly shallow, but that's a relative term, right? Shallow versus deep. So
yeah.
Depending upon where you are in the groundwater basin.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk just the rest of the presentation is about some of the stuff that's been going behind the scenes and the data analysis tools that we've been utilizing and using. And so this is our GeoTracker mapping tool that is available on the Water Board's PFAS website. You can download all the data that we talked about today and even more because our data analysis was as of June 2020. So it's an exciting thing that shows all of the data wherever it was been located on a map. And so you can download soil, water, air, whatever data is available that is uploaded into the system. An example of another data analysis tool are fingerprinting. Next slide, please. That we have been utilizing is this. So this slide shows If you're using a term called KOC, it's the organic carbon water partitioning coefficient. Is a basis for grouping PFAS compounds. These pie charts reflect 9 PFAS compounds arranged in the order of high KOC to low KOC. So if you, KOC is like the chemical concentration absorbed to organic carbon. So high KOC equates to high absorption. Those PFAS compounds with high KOC would be expected near or at the source areas. And those PFAS compounds with low KOC would be expected at the leading edges of plumes. So as illustrated here, if the PFDA is a higher absorptive PFAS compound, you would expect to see that at or near a source area. They're the ones that are shown in red. While the lower absorption, the faster moving, the ones that are shown in blue, PFBS, PFHXA, and PFHPA, would be expected to occur at the leading edges of plumes. The other PFAS compounds shown in orange and yellow would be expected somewhere in between. So obviously hydrogeology, depth to groundwater, geology are all factors that are important to assess to fully understand the fate and transport of PFAS in any contaminant in any watershed. But if you would look at this hypothetical example, from left to right in direction of groundwater flow, all samples show PFAS. The presence of PFDA occurs in monitoring well B and monitoring well A, indicating that there could be located at or near source areas, potentially 2 different source areas. The newer and more reliable mobile shorter chain PFAS are also present in all of the samples, the ones that are in blue. The older, longer chain PFAS are still detected in all the monitoring locations. I think this highlights, because of the complexity of the releases, and these are, conditions that are happening, that PFAS and the relationship of PFAS over time and the mobility of these compounds, commingling of plumes is possible, making the need to use multiple analysis tools very important. So now I'm going to hand it off to Sarah Beth. They'll show you another analysis tool being used to visualize data. Sarah Beth.
Thank you for the introduction, Wendy. So I've been exploring new methods of visualizing and analyzing water quality monitoring data in ways that are useful to regulators and the public. After joining the Region 2 Water Board in 2019 as an engineering geologist, I became so interested in improving the way we use our water quality data that I set out on my own personal time on nights and weekends on a project to build machine learning tools by coding in Python to help proactively manage California's groundwater resources. I've been using all of the data hosted in the Groundwater Ambient Monitoring and Assessment, or GAMA, database, which the state has made publicly available as an incredible resource for developing new tools for water management since about 2000. GAMA hosts groundwater data going all the 80s. That's 40 years of water quality data, including domestic and public water system wells. All of those tiny blue dots on the map on the left are groundwater wells for which we have chemical data, hundreds of thousands of wells and millions of individual chemical measurements. On the right, we have a diagram to my general approach to use this incredible public data resource. You can think of this as an Excel table where the rows are wells and the columns are chemical measurements taken for each well, like calcium, total dissolved solids, arsenic, and lead. The color of the cells is the magnitude of the measurement. Warmer colors are bigger numbers, and white indicates missing or blank data. For over 100,000 wells, we have many measurements for various chemicals, but no PFAS data. And for hundreds of wells, we have PFAS data, but relatively incomplete data for other chemicals. For all the wells included in my analyses, we have latitude and longitude locational data. What I set out to do is to build a predictor of PFAS contamination in wells that haven't been sampled for PFAS yet by leveraging what we do have and the decades of historical data for the chemicals available in GAMA. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about co-contaminants and how they can help us predict aspects of groundwater chemistry. Groundwater is a complex mixture partially determined by geological setting and then overprinted by anthropogenic contaminants like TCE and PCE that intermingle and co-occur in predictable ways controlled by chemistry and physics. When you look across data in GAMA, TCE and PCE are strongly positively correlated. This is because PCE will break down into TCE over time in the environment. The graph on the left is what that relationship, a positive correlation, looks like. Now we can step that up to look across the whole data set as in the cluster map on the right. Blue colors indicate negative Pearson correlation, red indicate a positive correlation like PCE and TCE. And you can see that geological chemicals like iron, calcium are positively correlated, as are certain anthropogenic chemicals like the PFAS. We can use these relationships between chemicals to fill in missing data and make predictions, and to fingerprint co-contaminants to explore possible sources of anthropogenic contamination, which I'll talk more about in the next slides. It's really important for me here to note that positive or negative correlation doesn't mean that all wells will follow this pattern. It means that it's generally true that where there's more PCE, there's more TCE. But we can't predict PFAS based on TCE, even though many PFAS chemicals are positively correlated with TCE. It's a fingerprint of many different co-occurring contaminants that may help predict the presence of PFAS concentrations, not just one correlative relationship. Next slide, please. So here's a conceptual example of using co-contaminant fingerprinting to narrow down possible sources of PFAS. The dots are wells, and their position in this image is determined using principal component analysis, or PCA. The distance between the dots, fingerprint of each well. Wells that are more similar are closer together. The way the dots group together into clumps is called clustering, which reveals the underlying structures and patterns in the chemical data in groundwater wells. So if we have a sample with known PFAS, but we don't know the sources of that PFAS, and its chemical fingerprint clusters with samples known to be from industry A, it means that the PFAS in that sample may have come from industry A. This approach can be used more efficiently identify source areas to expedite the cleanup process as part of a multiple lines of evidence approach. Next slide, please. Here is a conceptual example of the tool that I'm building using machine learning to enable regulators and water system managers to proactively manage drinking water resources to protect public health. A user can input some data about the well of interest, including the ID, locational data, latitude and longitude, and the screen depth of the well. The tool can return the predicted PFAS and the predicted risk between 0 and 100% that the well will exceed a regulatory threshold for PFAS, such as the EPA health advisory level for PFOS and PFOA, or the California notification level for PFOS or PFOA, in the context of all of the other wells in the state. This can help make sure that wells with the highest predicted concentration of PFAS and the highest risk are sampled in a timely and efficient manner. The idea is to have the tool ingest data that is easy for regulators to obtain and output predictions that are useful for prioritizing wells that pose the highest risk to public health, leveraging the full power of historical data for the local region and the context of the statewide data behind the scenes. This could help PFAS investigations expand to new regions of the state to help make efficient choices with respect to where to sample to detect and chase down the extent of PFAS plumes. Now, Annalisa is going to tell us more about how the state is handling the continuous challenge of understanding PFAS.
Thank you, Sarah Beth. Next slide, please. So some additional actions not yet mentioned in this presentation, in addition to the bulk fuel terminal order, as well as our public water supply sampling mentioned, are, and I'll just be jumping to the yellow or the golden box here. As mentioned by Wendy, we want to actually look at strategies for domestic well sampling in these impacted areas. And this is also building off of the work done by USGS, and then maybe even looking at some of these interesting techniques that Wendy and Sarah Beth have mentioned to target certain areas as well. So moving on to the next box, the gray box. Department of Defense, we've been working with them collaboratively on a parallel effort, and they recently announced to the State Water Board that all branches of the military with sites in California will be sampling their on-base drinking water supply wells. And these are wells owned by the Department of Defense for PFAS using EPA method 537.1, and then we'll also continue to collect samples of their finished water. So all data will be uploaded into the Division of Drinking Water's database. Sampling will begin and probably has already begun in 2020 and will be completed in 2021. So for those wells near and on the Department of Defense bases that are not owned by DoD, Division of Drinking Water, they do have plans to target them with orders for sampling in a future phase. So on the non-drinking water front for Department of Defense, the regional water boards are also continuing to work with the military branches on their base-specific investigations for soil and groundwater impacts. This is approximately about 60 bases in California. So we're also working with the regional boards on watershed-specific investigations that are informed by the PFAS data collected to date, and Wendy had mentioned that in an earlier slide. Next slide, please. So we recognize, though, that understanding PFAS is a continuous challenge. So there are various PFAS mixtures, replacement chemistry, this concept of the biotransformation from parent to daughter products, as Erica had mentioned, and regulating each PFAS compound one by one is obviously a challenge. That's why, there are various efforts to look at PFAS as various classes. So while we are moving forward working with OEHA as they develop public health goals for PFOA and PFOS, we are also looking at issuing notification and response levels for other detected PFAS compounds based on available health-based assessments. As Wendy had mentioned, we also want to perform this correlation study to better understand the relationship between PFAS compounds that are being detected at the source investigations versus the drinking water wells. And then we also continue to integrate any new data and provide enhanced data analysis and visualization tools. Our team is very interested in this area. Overall, we recognize, though, that this effort will also inform our current regulatory programs and practices at the Water Board. And so there will likely be additional policy discussions as we analyze and get additional data. So in addition to our partnership with OEHA, I do want to note that we continue to collaborate with the other organizations under Cal EPA that are implementing PFAS efforts, such as the Department of Toxic Substances Control and Cal Recycle as well. Next slide, please. So while we do not have a PFAS dedicated program or unit at the water boards, we do have a great team of staff, in addition to the speakers today who helped with the data analysis and development of this presentation. Their expertise and skills span various water board programs as identified on this slide, so a huge thank you to them. But I'd also like to thank our Division of Drinking Water district engineers and our regional water board case management staff. They've been integral partners as we've been implementing these various orders. And then our ELAP program staff and OWEMA staff as well, because their assistance and expertise has been very helpful as well as we've conducted this effort. Next slide. So with that, I'll leave it at the slide providing ways to access additional information. I'd also like to share that we recently created a DoD military page on our PFAS site, and basically it's intended to provide updates on our California efforts, as well as to point interested parties to the appropriate branch pages for more information. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, just first and foremost, incredible work, really. When I think of the fact that the Division of Drinking Water is about 5 years on here, and that this is really the first project that we've taken on that really harnesses the full complement of the technical, know-how and understanding of the water quality side of the house, the drinking water, and even the legal, when we talk about how we're going to be responding and ensuring that responsible parties are contributing to the massive effort that it's going to be to continue to remediate and the challenge, and that we're very at the front of much of the discussion, the follow-on discussion around what are the policy implications, how are we going to begin to really manage? And there's still a lot of questions as to just, what is the complete scope of the impact and the costs? And so there's a lot of uncertainty, and there I want to acknowledge and thank Sarah Beth again for really just the incredible innovative work in trying to fill in that uncertainty, knowing that we, can't sample everywhere at every time, and we need tools that help shine a light on where we should be investigating, where to put our limited resources in response. And so I just can't thank staff enough, everyone, all our colleagues here in the program. And I think it was well worth saving this so that we were fresh here to chat and further dig in. I'm just blown away. My hair's flying back right now. So thank you guys for the great work. Questions from other board members here? I have a number, but I'll first open it up to my fellow board members here.
Yeah, I have some questions and just echo, your thanks and kind of accolades for, I think, really the, unprecedented and ability to collaborate and cross, divisions and even BDOs, which is a real challenge. And also just, I think, Sarah Beth, I just feel like what you have done and the way that staff have created a space for the kind of innovation and investigation that you bring to this, I think is reflective of the Water Board's culture and trying to enable that kind of innovation and new approaches from staff. And even as we haven't been able to integrate all of our data systems as much as we would like, I think the ability of staff just to innovate and create space for that is really wonderful to see. A couple things I wanted to ask about or kind of comment on. One is just, well, actually, let me start with a question. One question is just, I know over time, as discussing PFAS, we've asked about, the feasibility of being able to look at a public health goal by class rather than individuals. And I know there's been a lot of challenges. I'm just wondering if there's kind of an update on where, the discussions with OEHA are and sort of reflections from them on how that might be approached.
So thank you. I believe that maybe Darren or Dan, if you'll be able to provide that update, I'll pass the baton to you.
Yeah, thanks. So they're still working on it. Board Member Firestone, there's hope still that they can do it. It will be subgroups. It won't be one massive class. It is very complex, and it's using some new methods as far as how they can predict the interaction of materials in a rapid fashion. So it's going to be some time yet before we get there, but they are still working to see if they can.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and I think the board member, if you don't mind, I think the point there is certainly, and we saw, the thousands of classes and constituents that compose PFAS generally, and just trying to go through each one of those individually, we could be here forever. And I think that, and it's why we continue to hear and we're supportive of how do we explore perhaps doing it by class. I'll also flag though that when it comes to treatment and really looking at, okay, well, what captures then all of them, right? And maybe even looking at that as a way to approach that as we go and we see the number of short chains throughout the environment is why I think we're starting, focus on just, if we can capture some of those shorter chains, does it then capture then, all, those obviously larger chains or what happens on the treatment side? Again, a lot of questions more than answers, but I think we need to be kind of pursuing multiple fronts there because it will be overwhelming if we have to go, constituent by constituent by constituent. And there may be ways, again, as we look at treatment, as a sort of treatment technology side, that we kind of capture most of them anyway by just focusing on a few smaller chains, if you will. Just appreciate the thought there, board member.
Yeah, no, and the work that, yeah, absolutely. So just one reflection as we, along those lines of just, there are so many constituents here, and it's a challenge to think about also what treatment options are and how we are going to be kind of weighing all these things into the future. I wanted to just put a pin in, the work that I know we've discussed about cost of compliance with that board member Dudek and Vice Chair Diadamo are helping to lead. I think there's a real challenge, or I'd like us to think about how we are able to start to look at the kind of the fact that we have cumulative costs from the kind of piecemeal approach that we have to take with drinking water regulatory actions. And I think PFAS, and we just talked about that yesterday, the detection limit, we need to and should be looking individually at what the right decisions are for each of these individual things. And that's, I think we shouldn't weaken standards because of, maybe a cumulative view. But I also do think there's the very real impact that we don't get to look at that cumulative review and weigh the kind of different risks between things and just understand that cost. And I'm not sure quite how to do that. But I just, I think I just wanted to put a pin as you all are thinking about cost of compliance, because I think we often think about it within the water quality context, and we're trying to bridge drinking water and water quality here. I think there's just a big challenge within the drinking water space. And I know, we've been doing a lot of thinking on economic feasibility in general, but I think it would be helpful for us to make sure we're deliberate within that process about thinking about how we continue to weigh the public health impacts, but also are, just giving some context for ourselves and understanding sort of the cumulative piece that otherwise we don't get to see. Another just quick comment or suggestion, actually two little ones, just with staff. I think this is already on all of everyone's agenda, but certainly as we look at thinking about sampling, how we approach sampling private wells in the vicinity, I know the SAFER program is looking at, and some regional boards already offer some private well testing options and are funding private well testing options. So I, encourage us sooner rather than later to enable this kind of testing within that. I think staff are already doing that. And then lastly on my list was just, I think this is a great example of an opportunity for us to think about how we might look intentionally or analyze a bit around sort of racial and economic disparities in the patterns that we're seeing around challenges around the state. And that doesn't, I think just as we're trying to understand this challenge, the source protection and the impacts in terms of public health, and just it's an opportunity as we think of how we are developing an approach to racial equity, broadly within the water boards. This is an example of where there's maybe an opportunity to look at that within the kind of investigations and overlays that we're doing just to try to understand that piece. Those are my thoughts now, and I'm looking forward to hearing public comments.
Thank you so much, board member. And to flag, I think on that last one, I know OEHA, the Office of Environmental Human Health, Health Hazard Assessment, there we are, is refreshing CalEnviroScreen, which is a tool that is used to just do that, take in consideration multiple sort of stressors and factors and try to highlight these cumulative impacts and stresses, both on the water side, air, and the other spaces that Cal EPA oversees. So might be a good place to insert some discussion as well. Other board members, thoughts, questions?
I have is it okay? All right. I have a couple of questions, and just echo the other comments of the other board members, absolutely phenomenal job here. This has been an eye-opening education for me, even as an engineer with a background in drinking water, to see an investigation like this from the ground floor. We're really recognizing that we may have a significant problem here in our state, and I mean, probably worldwide, really, in dealing with the proliferation of these compounds throughout our environment. And so for me, this is a stark reminder about source control, about, not just dealing with the contaminant. I mean, obviously, to Board Member Firestone's point, if it ends up in the source, or sorry, in the groundwater supply at the end of the day, we need to deal with that. We need to protect human health. But ideally, we're getting it out of the system in the first place and stopping that from happening. And so, I was really encouraged by the governor signing SB 1044 a few days ago, which prohibits aqueous PFAS chemicals and aqueous firefighting foam. So I hope that's kind of a first step in recognizing that we need to be proactive in addressing this on the front end, and knowing that these compounds are not just what we're finding to be prevalent in groundwater, but also throughout our environment. We're still coming into contact with it probably every day, probably each one of us. I know some of the studies have shown that it's present in just about every single human being's bloodstream. And so just recognizing that this challenge that we're all facing goes beyond water, frankly. It's all of our environment, and we all need to just keep that, I think, in mind as we go forward here. Not to downplay the significance of addressing any of these challenges. And so just a couple questions. And one is to Sarah Beth. Really exciting to see what you're learning there on the fingerprinting, and I want to know more. and I might ask to actually follow up with you later so you can take a little deeper dive and see what you're doing. But what is your timing? I didn't really get a sense for when you might have some sort of initial results, because it just, if we want to take advantage of this tool that you're developing on your nights and weekends, I want to make sure we're properly supporting it at the Water Board. And so, Sarah Beth, if you could just kind of let me know where you're actually at in this.
Yeah, so right now, basically, it exists as a tool that I can use with inputting data. It doesn't have a friendly interface, and so I'm able to provide predictions, and it's like not ready to roll out to the regional boards.
Okay, well, I guess I will request, I think, a follow-up briefing on this just to better understand sort of how we, the state board and regional boards can support your effort and help really bring that to fruition so it can be used more broadly. And, I would imagine there's probably some benefit in getting some peer review type, concurrence with the tool that you've been developing, just to make sure that we have confidence in it. But again, really exciting, and thank you for working on that and being innovative, and again, very supportive of those efforts. Thank you. My other question has to do with the the occurrence of, again, the short chain compounds that we were seeing today. And I believe Division of Drinking Water, Mr. Opalhimus, you've requested a notification response level for some of those compounds that we've been seeing. So again, just wondering, what is the timing of that, so we can continue to be proactive in addressing these compounds as we learn more about them and the risks?
Yeah, in my conversations with OEHA, they're preparing a notification level recommendation for PFBS, one of the short chain materials. It looks like they'll have it available for us in November, and then our intent is to follow the new process that was signed into law by the governor, even though it's not technically in effect until January, but to honor the process of going through the public notification and information hearing before the board. And
then the other ones, I guess, would be forthcoming.
Yeah, they're obviously, so I think was kind of hinted at in some of the presentation, the short chains are inhibited by a lack of study data, health data on them. And that's obviously rapidly improving as the world begins to turn its attention to this, and studies are happening. So they're quick to try to get on it. PFBS did have enough data for them to work on, and they'll continue to track and see when they can do others of the ones we requested. And we recall we had requested the 7, and I don't remember how many of the 7 are short chain. I think like half of them of the 7 are short chain.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. That's all I have.
That how short a chain does it go down of the 7, if you remember? I mean, is it just to like 4? Or we're going down to 3?
Yes. I'd have to get my own chart out to remember which numbers. I used to have them memorized. But
Wendy may try to save us here. Wendy.
I'm sorry.
4.
Let me look it up.
4 chain. It goes down to 4 chain. All right. Thank you, Wendy. Board Member Dodek.
Board Member McGuire actually asked my questions. So thank you, Board Member. But yes, I also wanted to just add on a huge thanks to staff for all the analysis, the presentation, and second Board Members McGuire's request to Sarah Beth George for a deeper dive and to see how we can support her. And I also was going to bring up the issue of peer review. I think for this to be a viable tool for us to use, and I really want it to be a viable tool, it does need to have some peer review associated with it as well. So let's talk, let's find out more about it, and let's see what we can do to support you.
Yes, you're here. Annalisa, Sarah Beth, do you want to say anything further about the project?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of add how Sarah Beth, sorry, just kind of provide a little bit of input on how we were introduced to Sarah Beth. So around December of last year, that was when we had hosted that large PFAS kind of information sharing event, and it came along with this datathon. And so Sarah Beth joined the datathon, and she shared a lot of the expertise and knowledge that she was already using kind of in a different realm as she was in school, and kind of applied it to PFAS. So I just wanted to put a plug in terms of these datathons that we're hosting, with the water boards. It really provides us an opportunity to look so much more differently at different tools and on a different wavelength at our data than we're used to.
Thank you, Annalisa. Sarah Beth?
Yeah, and just to the peer review point, I'm drafting a publication and submitting it to a journal. The preprint will be available soon, and then the review should be done around December. So.
Fantastic, even more incredible. And I think we're all looking forward to getting a deeper brief. And I think as you're hearing here, make sure that you're supported in a real, programmatized way here. What I have found incredible is just how fast we're changing internally in the use of either Python or R or other coding languages, and really the computer science know-how that's needing to be brought to these really thorny issues and questions, where we have all this data, but we're needing to get better information out of that data so that we can actually act out on it. And without these tools, without these processing advances, we're not going to get there. So just thank you. It's it's the bleeding edge of so much of the work that I see going on here. And so let's programatize it, let's formalize it better, and make sure that you're definitely being supported in this. So just thank you for your own inspiration here. Shala, is there anything you'd like to add around some of this? Oh, one moment. Let's see. I should ask you to, yes.
Yeah, no, thank you. I just wanted to put in a plug for our regional board, San Francisco Bay Region. Sarah Beth works for San Francisco Bay Region. She works 80% of her time doing other stuff. She has other responsibilities, and we have been lucky to be able to support her for 20% of her time. So again, I'm glad that everybody recognizes the talent, and we look forward to further detailed discussion.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Vice Chair, did you want to provide any thought before? We have about 5 individuals to comment here.
Nothing further. Actually, Board Member McGuire had my same questions as well, just wanting to see what we could do to find out more. So thank you all, and we'll just hear the comments. Look forward to that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And with that, then we can move on to our first commenter. We have Andrea Ventura from Clean Water Action. Oh, one moment. You should be asked to unmute here.
Hey, Andrea, this is Michael. So we've invited, there we go. Okay.
There we go. Okay.
Hi, everyone. First of all, great presentation. This, I think most of you know, this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart and taking up a lot of my time and energy. So I really appreciated learning as much as I did and the work that's proceeding. So thank you for all of that. Just a couple of quick comments and questions, actually. First of all, I'm really excited to hear the board discussing amongst yourselves the need for source reduction. I'm proud to say that Clean Water Action was one of 5 co-sponsors, including other environmentalists and the California firefighters, to bring forth SB 1044 and to see that pass. So we're really excited that that happened. We're proud of it. But also seeing the data that's coming in is going to help inform us what we can do as advocates on the source reduction side, what we need to be looking at next as we try to eradicate unessential uses of these chemicals. That's going to be really important. I'm also glad to hear that the discussion about how do we look at this in a broader sense and not just regulate PFOA and PFOS and how do we look at this class of chemicals, or at least chunks of them, is continuing. I realize that no one has really figured that out yet, and I'm glad that California has taken a lead on trying to figure that out. I will note that other states are regulating up to 6 or 7 PFAS, maybe even more in a couple of cases. So we're a little behind in that, but I'm glad that that conversation is going on. One of the things that there were 2 questions, and I'll just put them out there and then kind of go offline and let them be discussed. But I was really struck by Wendy's presentation, where you saw that we had higher levels in some cases of the short chain PFAS. But I was also looking at the timing, considering that the long chain have been out there for many decades, and we're looking at data after 2000 or 2010, and we're seeing this explosion of short chains. Is that concerning? Is that telling us that their mobility and the numbers, the amount of short chain chemicals that we need to use, we need more of them for products and for processes than we do the long chain? They're smaller molecules. Is that having an effect? I'm also concerned about the fact that we're seeing so much of it in leachate, but leachate's going to go through the wastewater system. So is that going to cycle some of this stuff back in and put more pressure on the POTWs? And then finally, and maybe you can't answer all my questions, but I was really glad to hear you, Board Chair Esquivel, say that, we need to look at maybe treatment techniques as the way to capture some of these short chain without going through the chemical by chemical. And I'm wondering if that discussion is happening as a way to regulate PFAS, or if there's any consideration of adding to our request to a WEHA for a public health goal at least one short chain chemical, since the treatment for those can be different than for long chain. So as they say on radio, I'll take my answers off air, or offline, but I just wanted to put those thoughts out there as part of the conversation. Again, thank you for a great presentation and for the great work that's going on.
Thank you, Ms. Ventura. I really appreciate your good comments and good questions. And to your point, I think probably don't have the full answer there. I think on the first one, when it comes to the fate and transport of ultimately PFAS, whether it's being discharged then from wastewater treatment plants or otherwise, or how, or is it in biosolids being disposed perhaps as well. Those, I think we're still there's still questions, and I think we're still requiring some follow-on. I will see if Wendy or anyone has any thoughts otherwise. And when it comes to treatment technology as a sort of pursuit for kind of capturing them, as opposed to, I'm not sure at this point how sort of a rigorous discussion we have. I know it's simply part of a discourse and discussion that is out there generally. I'm not sure if we have anything to report. And as I understand it, the current request to OEHA goes all the way down to 4-chain PFAS sort of constituents here. So it is, I think, getting at some of these smaller ones. But let's see if Wendy or Annalisa have anything to add.
I just wanted,
Go ahead, Annalisa.
I was just going to maybe put in a plug-in for the work that Department of Toxic Substances Control is doing in terms of their Safer Consumer Product Program. And that kind of gets to a response that you were asking about, Andrea. You know, they're looking at PFAS in carpets and rugs, in textiles, treatment in textiles, as well as, you know, they've been shifting into these food packaging products as well that use PFAS. And so the one thing that I like about their process is just the fact that they look at what are the products where you really need to use PFAS. It's an essential use, it's a must-have. And where you don't, they kind of go down a different path and they look at what are the substitutes, because what they're trying to avoid are these regrettable substitutes as well. You see them a lot in these pans that say PFOA free, but they're not PFAS free. So I wanted to put a plug in with that and then pass it on to Wendy to add in anything else in terms of my response and then any of your other questions. Thank you.
No, that was perfect, Annalisa. I was going to bring that up as well. You know, right. Our awareness is the huge part of the unknowns, right, Andrea, on where these short chains came in and out and been in production, right, versus the long. So, I mean, right now, that is the data that we're seeing within the close proximity of the airports and landfills. So we'll see what the other data and the complete data set, maybe once we get more of the data set, we'll see and understand a little bit more. So.
Yeah, and you know, for me, the part of the concern on the landfill question, at least, and fate and transport, is that some of these landfills, as was indicated, you know, were created prior to even leachate systems being installed. So you have, you know, direct connectivity and groundwater contamination then happening, and you know, kind of seeing that. So yeah, it's going to be challenging here. Okay, thank you, Ms. Ventura. Really appreciate the good comment and discussion. Next up, we have Talmage Jordan on my list here. But hold on, let me look at my scrolling list here because Talmage.
Thank you, everyone. My questions were answered by the wonderful presentation. I'll yield.
Great, thank you. Much appreciated. Then next we have Lisa Dugas. Or Dugas.
It's Dugas. Thank you very much. Talmage and I are both from LAX, and we really just wanted to listen to the program and see what was presented, so we don't have any comments. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your participation and interest nonetheless still. Thank you. So then we have Jared Voskel from the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. Hello.
Hi, good afternoon. Good morning. Can you hear me okay? All right. Sorry, it's a little dark. I'm Jared Voskel on behalf of the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment this morning. Good morning, board chair and members. I first wanted to start by thanking your team's accessibility during the development of the order to POTWs, and since its release in the summer, to connect with our members and provide presentations and answer questions that have come up. We've really appreciated the dialogue, sharing our sector's perspective and input as your team developed the order over the last year. And as this quarter progresses, I know you may expect to receive a lot of more questions from our folks as they begin to the sampling part of the order. I think the questions partly will be coming because for POTWs and non-drinking water matrices, they're not approved methods. And you know, what does an approved method get you? What does an approved method provide? Under 40 CFR Part 136, EPA's criteria for certifying new standard methods require a thorough demonstration of accuracy, precision, method detection levels, representativeness, ruggedness, comparability, and availability for the proposed analytical procedure. And the EPA is developing this. I think it's a 1600 series method, but that's not going to be online for another year or so, I think at least. And so we understand the urgency of needing to get this information. And so we are using a tool that's available, but it's not an approved method. And so earlier in the staff presentation, it said there were 900 samples collected from the airport and landfills. And for public water systems, there are 2,900 samples collected. In comparison, for POTWs under the order, the annual collections are going to result in a bare minimum of 5,000 samples. And that's because there's 259 recipients of the order. There's 5 samples of influent, effluent, biosolids, an equipment blank, and a field blank. And then these are collected over 4 quarters, plus some additional groundwater samples for some recipients, which I didn't quantify. But for a cost perspective of all those samples, the average price of analysis is $350 for a sample. So at a minimum, the cost of the order is nearly $2 million. And so to our sector, at that expense, it's critical that the data set that's generated by the order is reliable and comparable. And because there aren't approved methods, you have to endeavor to build in that reliability through other ways. You can get it with a QAP, you can use blanks, you can use collect multiple samples. And there's been preliminary interest and dialogue from our sector about proceeding like the other recipients in the prior phases of the order with regard to developing a sector-wide series of protocols that could be adapted by the individual agencies. But there's time, costs, and expertise required for that. And it only assists uniformity on the collection side, which doesn't pertain to whether the results from the different labs are comparable, because each lab is doing their own non-approved modification to the drinking water methods. And from a few of the smaller comparisons we've seen of lab results and split samples, there is variability in between the labs. And for biosolids, it's been significant, which is a concern given what that means for the value of the data produced under the order and whether the submissions by different recipients are comparable and how reliable the data ultimately is. Last I'll note with regards to cost for the Central Valley, I think 102 of the 259 recipients are located there. So approximately 40% of the cost will be borne by that region. And of those 102, 68 have design flows below 5 MGD. So, 25% of the recipients are really small, and it underscores the concern with these incurred costs and getting meaningful data, to the board from this order. And so we want to have that kind of assurance. A couple of just quick passing thoughts during the presentation I'd like to share. The first one was with regards to PFAS as a class. And I've recently learned about this. I think there's a tool called the TOF analysis, TOF, total organic fluorine. I was in a workshop a couple of weeks ago where a question arose about this to a commercial lab representative. And it sounds like it's really costly, and by its nature, you lose a lot of the sensitivity. So your confidence really only, is in the parts per billion range, which, to restate that, is 1,000 parts per trillion, which really contrasts with what you're looking at in the single-digit response levels for drinking water. And so I think, that's an important consideration. Also, with regards to treatment, there was a project you may have seen in the press that just was launched in North Carolina. I think the capital costs were $100 million for a treatment facility that could eliminate the PFAS from the discharges. You still have an issue of where does the PFAS go, because you're not destroying it. But so as to say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And source control is the way to go with this. And we are very supportive of DTSC's work on PFAS and food packaging and carpets. And we are supportive as a sector in pursuing solutions to this source control. And last, factually, we've seen, with PFOS and PFOA, its presence in the blood serum has decreased significantly over time, and it correlates with it being phased out of production. And so we do think that really is a testament and underscores the importance of dealing with it on the outset and not having to treat for it on the backside. And when there are these really highly contaminated sites, the costs for that are very expensive. And so as we go forward, I'd just like to thank again the board for all its work and the team. Really incredible endeavor that you've been conducting since March of 2019. And as we go into collections for our sector, we are happy to continue to participate, and keep an eye out for some more emails with questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vosco. Thanks for CASA's always great engagement and representation in all of these issues. I know they're not easy, and they come at cost, certainly on the monitoring side. So, the hope is certainly that we don't see as much happening at the treatment plants, but again, I think at this beginning stage, it is about simply trying to better understand and characterize where we're finding contamination, where we're seeing the fate and transport here. When it comes to the appropriateness of the panels, because they are intended for drinking water, to your point, and it is different when we are testing. I don't know if Annalisa or others want to kind of speak to the appropriateness of it, certainly, again, we do understand that these are meant for drinking water panels here, and that it comes with challenge in ensuring that there's trust, I guess, again, to Mr. Bosco's point on the data. So any comfort there about how we're seeing that?
Great. I think I'll just maybe start with more of a perspective from a non-laboratory expert perspective, and then I'll pass it to Wendy and Erica to maybe add in some of the details. But, when we issued our orders and we started looking at our source investigations, this was before, and I mean, up until today, EPA does not have an accredited, or EPA does not have an approved method for non-drinking water matrices. However, we recognize, though, that Department of Defense, they are far ahead because they've been doing a lot of the sampling and source investigations nationwide, have been kind of putting together a really great kind of box in terms of ensuring that the data has a certain level of quality. And that's the way I see it. And so that box is what we're relying on for these investigations. And investigations are really to go off of this hypothesis of, is there a presence or is there an absence in these areas in the state that we are making a hypothesis that they may be there for certain reasons. I do want to note, though, that the DoD QSM is a kind of a basis, and Department of Defense is also involved in development of the 1600 method that Mr. Voshko had mentioned as well. So, in terms of what we're hearing from our contacts at US EPA as well, we believe that that bar itself will either be equal to or enhanced by the 1600. I think that's all I have notes for, and I wanted to just kind of open it up to Erica and Wendy if they wanted to add in.
Thank you. Erica?
Thank you.
Yeah, hi. And I think Annalisa did a great job characterizing where we're at with the use of the modified method. But they are, it's a mischaracterization to say that the labs are all using their own modification. They're following some specific guidelines. And so, we do have a lot of confidence in the use of that method for the non-drinking water matrices. And of course, it's going to meet our data quality objectives for this initial investigation for presence, absence. And then I guess I would just add that I appreciated the comment about the total organofluorine. And it is a newer method and something worth exploring, but there are other advanced analytical methods out there as well that are being explored to help us understand like total PFAS. And so additional evaluation of that method would be needed to fully understand it. But even if the detection limit were at 1,000, I've actually looked at this, and I think that they can get down to about 1,000 nanograms per liter. And so even though when we look for PFAS and PFOA, that's typically much lower than that. If we were looking at all of the PFAS in the sample, if we actually got to see that, we are not sure what that concentration is yet. So it would be useful for us to know, is it above 1,000 or below 1,000? And that might help us make some better decisions about how much further we need to go down the route of advanced analytical to characterize which PFAS those are.
Great, thank you. That was very helpful. Shala?
Yes, thank you. Just first of all, I wanted to mention that I understand the concern that we heard. We've heard this from this group, we hear it from oil companies. But the one point I wanted to emphasize that maybe staff didn't catch is the laboratories that are using the DoD QSI method are accredited by our ELAB in use of that method. The other thing about that method is that it actually uses the more superior matrix preparation, which is called isotope dilution. And in fact, the new US EPA's method for even drinking water, kind of looking at learning from that method to enhance it. So basically, the analysis is very, very similar to the approved US EPA method for drinking water matrices, but they have come up with a standard method to make sure they eliminate matrix interferences so they can have good results. And in some cases, it could actually produce more superior results because of that.
That's helpful. Yeah, I am getting a good sense that there's great confidence, I think, in the process here, but appreciate the flag and still concern and the discussion here then. So thank you everyone for that. We have one last commenter. We have Stephen Jepson.
Hi, this is Steve Jepson, Executive Director for the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works, or SCAP. Thank you, Chair and Board, for allowing me to comment today. And thanks to the State Water Board staff on a great presentation. The data management is so impressive, and it makes me very comfortable to drink my tap water down here in Southern California. I wanted to echo the comments by my colleague, Jared Boskul. He said a lot of the things that I wanted to say for SCAP, so you won't have to hear me drone on for the whole 5 minutes. It'll be shorter. Yeah, as you know, there were 30 airports, 196 landfills, and 271 chrome facilities that have received sampling orders. And we're still awaiting data and testing for the 271 chrome facilities. As you're also aware, and you've heard, there's 259 POTWs that have multiple sampling locations quarterly within their facilities. This is a lot of sampling, a lot of lab testing with a small amount of labs that are actually doing PFAS analysis. That's all right, it's all manageable, but it should be noted. Our sector is actively engaged to provide timely, accurate, and uniform results to the State Water Board for PFAS compounds. We've been putting on webinars. We've had our, by far, largest attended webinars dealing with PFAS in the State Order. We are preparing additional webinars, specifically on sampling methods and QAPs and the questionnaire. So we're very engaged in trying to provide timely and uniform responses to the order. Because PFAS compounds are so prevalent in our lives, they're in dental floss, non-stick pans, as you're aware of, pizza boxes, etc. The sampling is very crucial. Folks can't wear sunscreen or cosmetics or water-resistant clothing. As such, we're working on a sector-wide sampling plan that will help us get accurate results. And we want to, like Jared indicated, we're working on a template that can be shared. So rather than 259 POTWs developing their own sampling plan, we'll develop a template that can be modified a little bit. It should be noted that the State Board also released sampling guidance that suggested a QAP consistent with the recycled water policy. And the recycled water policy requires QAPs to have regional or State Water Board approval. That would be 250 plans to be approved by regional or State Water Board, quite a drain. So as I mentioned, we're working on a uniform template and to produce the data of known quality that the State Water Board desires. There's a bit of a lively discussion on the methods, and it's mildly comforting to hear the reassurance from lab professionals and staff, but I will point out that our sector has seen highly variable results using different labs with the same samples. So we know that that variability is there. I've seen lab professionals have spirited debates on nuances of the method within the DoD testing methods. So I want to leave you with a few final comments here. As I said, we're working on this order aggressively. We've had multiple webinars on the order. We will be preparing a request for an extension. We will be doing quarterly sampling over a year, and we think we would be much better off delaying our sampling and testing deadlines by 1 quarter. So it would all occur within the year 2021. We're still struggling, our staff is still struggling with COVID issues, with remote working issues, and not to mention we have holidays and such coming up in this final quarter, and the significant load on the labs for all this testing. So I wanted to make you aware of that. And oh, I see I used my 5 minutes anyway. Okay, I'll close up. The most important thing we want to get across is product stewardship is so important here. We can't treat our way out of this problem. We can't treat our way out of this problem on the backs of the ratepayers, while the manufacturers globally continue to reap profits. So we're reaching out to our fellow water organizations and the environmental organizations. We need aggressive product stewardship for this. Thank you very much for letting me comment today.
Thank you. Really appreciate the comments. And again, yes, source reduction is the key here, and responsible parties ultimately. And this, this testing, better understanding the fate and transport, who's responsible for what plumes, perhaps, it's going to be a lot of follow-on work, but it's going to be really critical because, communities can't be left holding the bag, if you will, yet again, when it comes to responsible parties that have made a lot of money on various constituents, but the cleanup costs being borne upon communities. And we already know how greatly stressed those funds are as is. So really appreciate your comments and thank you. Fellow board members, any other questions or thoughts? It's been, and again, just a very incredible work. Very pleased to see it. I think we're looking to make sure we're supporting some of the more innovative work that's going on in this space, but know it to be, I recall the first sort of PFAS informational item we had and how real terrifying it can be and overwhelming when it comes to the ubiquity of the constituents now everywhere, their continued use, the continued challenge then of what cleanup will look like as we move toward even adopting a maximum contaminant limit. We don't have one for these constituents. We have response levels and notification levels. We're in the middle of the regulatory activity here, so a lot of questions and still yet more work. But I will say, having had this informational item now, and as we have successive ones, I'm beginning to feel at least that it's becoming more understandable, becoming more knowable. At least we're knowing what questions to better start to ask now. And we have an incredible community between the drinking water systems, wastewater systems, and everyone, our family here, even at Cali, PA. Again, acknowledging the importance of the Department of Toxic Substance Control, OEHA, Cal Recycle, to really having a comprehensive approach here. So thankful for the work that I know staff does on that front as well. There's monthly, if not more frequent meetings around the PFAS response at Cali, PA. So just thankful for the disparate leadership, we'll say, in all of this. And if no further comment from board members, we can conclude this item. I think we're ready for a break here, so we can go ahead and take a 10-minute break and then come back and have our update on the Administrative Hearings Office. Any thoughts or comments from folks before we go to break? And if not, we'll come back at 11:35. All right, it's 11:35. Can start to gather back up. Next, we'll be moving on to item number 8 on our agenda, which is a report from the presiding hearing officer on the first year of the Water Board's Administrative Hearings Office. And here with us is the Honorable Mr. Alan Lilly. Good to see you. Good to have you with us here this morning.
Well, thank you, Chair Esquivel. I don't think honorable is in my title, but I'll take it. So, but I won't let it go to my head. So good morning. We'll wait here, there. So my name is Alan Lilly, and I'm giving a report today on the Administrative Hearings Office first year. Next slide, please. So just in summary of what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to begin my presentation with a brief discussion of the background that led to the Administrative Hearings Office. And I know this is, the board members know about this, so please bear with me, but I think the background information will be useful for members of the public who may not be as familiar with the background. And then I'll move on to the details of what we've done and what we plan to do in the future. Next slide, please. So just by way of background, as the board is familiar, under the traditional water right hearing process, which was in effect for many years and still is in effect, 1 or 2 board members are the hearing officers. Then after the hearing, the board staff works with the hearing officers to prepare a draft decision or order. And then the entire board considers that draft decision in both closed session and in a public meeting, receives comments from the public and interested parties, makes edits, and votes. So next slide, please. With the Administrative Hearings Office being created in 2018, the legislature gave the new office the authority to conduct water right hearings. This legislation did not change the statutes regarding the traditional water right hearing process, which remains as an alternative process. Next slide, please. The rest of my presentation today is going to talk about the Administrative Hearings Office statutes and process. Water Code Section 1110 established the Administrative Hearings Office as an independent organization unit within the State Water Board to provide neutral, fair, and efficient forum for adjudications. Section 1111 created the presiding hearing officer position and authorizes the presiding hearing officer to hire other personnel. Next slide, please. So consistent with this statute, the board put the Administrative Hearings Office here in the org chart, definitely as an independent unit. And you can just see the context of where we fit in with the board's overall divisions and offices. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the legislation went into effect on July 1, 2019, and the board then conducted its process for hiring the presiding hearing officer, which culminated in this media release on September 18. It was certainly a great honor to me to be hired for the first hearing officer in this new office, and I appreciate the trust that the board has placed in me to set up and run this new office. I started working in this new position then on November 1st. Next slide, please. The budget change proposal for the 2019-2020 fiscal year that funded the Administrative Hearings Office funded 6 additional positions within the office, which are shown on this org chart. During the first half of this year, I went through the hiring process and hired the people who are listed here. It's a little hard to read, but I'll just go through and mention who the people are. The 2 attorneys I hired are Nicole Kunze and Megan Nyes. Nicole previously worked in private practice, also worked as a law clerk to a United States Court of Appeals judge, and then for 8 years in the board's Office of Chief Counsel doing water rights work. Megan worked as a law clerk in 3 different courts, one of which was a U.S. District Court, and another, which we still haven't gotten a lot of information from her about, was the Supreme Court of the Republic of Palau. She has told us that even though it's an independent country, they do apply a lot of the common law that's been developed in California and the United States. So both of them obviously came with excellent backgrounds and are very qualified to be hearing officers within our office. On the right side of the chart are listed Environmental Program Manager Skylar Anderson, Senior Water Resource Control Engineer Kyle Wooldridge, and AGPA Amy Blunk, who all came to my office from the Division of Water Rights and brought substantial experience and expertise, which I appreciate very much. And then our SSA, Nicole Mullen, worked in private practice for a short time after graduating from UC Davis, and then came to our office and brought considerable expertise in computer and website work. And this expertise has certainly been very valuable as we have worked through developing our pre-hearing and hearing processes. And I'll just say, I don't know what the odds were when I started this process to hire 6 people and have 2 of them named Nicole, but that's the way it turned out. But we certainly are very glad to have both of them and the other 4 members on board as well. Next slide, please. So Water Code 1112 provides that various types of matters may be assigned to the Administrative Hearings Office. The items listed in the first bullet here and the 3 sub-bullets below that are automatically assigned by law to the Administrative Hearings Office. So when we have water right matters involving administrative civil liability complaints, proposed CDOs, or revocations, those automatically go to our office. The Water Board, the statute provides the Water Board also may assign other adjudicative hearings to the AHO, and I will discuss in a few minutes the assignments the board has made. The statutes also provide that the AHO hearing officers may assist the board in conducting other adjudicative hearings and may conduct other types of work which are listed here. So far, none of these additional assignments have occurred, but certainly we look forward to them occurring in the future. Next slide, please. The section 1114 of the Water Code spells out the process for Administrative Hearings Office orders and proposed orders. For certain types of proceedings, the Hearings Office adopts a final order, which normally must be adopted within 90 days after the matter is submitted. And for those matters, the final order then is subject to review by the board through petitions for reconsideration. For all other types of proceedings, the hearing officer prepares a proposed order, again, normally within 90 days, which then is considered by the board. And the board under the statute has various options for how to process that proposed order. And it's subject then to a second 90-day deadline to do that. So far, everything we've received has been in the second category. We've already transmitted 2 proposed orders to the board, and we are working on several others that we will be transmitting to the board soon. Next slide, please. So the next few slides describe what we've done to make the information about our proceedings available to interested parties and members of the public. This slide shows the AHO homepage, which is on the Water Board's website. It's easily accessed by going to the Water Board's homepage and then clicking on the Programs tab, and then on the Administrative Hearings Office tab within that. And as shown here, there are links within it to several other web pages that we have set up. Next slide, please. One of the pages we've set up lists and has links to all of the notices and orders that we have issued. We also email all of our notices and orders to everyone who has signed up through the Water Board's LIRIS email subscription list to receive those. We currently have about 230 LIRIS subscribers. Next slide, please. We also have web pages for each of our specific matters. This page shows the links to those. And on those, we post the important documents. As you all know, we are subject to some significant limitations through accessibility requirements on what we are allowed to post on the web pages. But subject to those limitations, we do post our important documents for each matter. Next slide, please. We also have a web page that shows or gives links for parties who are interested in watching our hearings, which we've set up to be done through YouTube Live. People can either watch them real time or just, and this obviously we relied on the board's expertise in setting this up, but either can watch real time or recordings of the matters. The various recordings for each matter are assembled into a playlist so that they can be easily accessed. We haven't exactly reached rock star status and probably won't, but I am happy to see that some of these were getting close to 100 views. So there certainly is some interest in our proceedings. Next slide, please. We've also set up, separate from the web page, an FTP site where we post the pertinent documents for each matter. And this is something where I've spent a lot of time on this because I think it's very important for the parties and the integrity of our process. Historically, for water rights matters, if a party was interested in seeing the historical documents, they had to go to the Water Rights Records Unit, look at the paper files, and order copies of the pages that they wanted. And of course, those files could be many inches thick or even feet thick in some cases. With the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously it's much harder for people to do that. The Water Rights Records Office is not open as much, and it's harder for people to access those files. So for both that reason, and also just so we can have a common database for each matter, we have set up an FTP site where we post the historical documents for each matter. It does mean we have to spend some time copying and scanning the documents from the paper files and then posting them here, but we do think it's worth the effort because of the benefits it provides to the parties. And then, of course, as hearings proceed, we post all of the exhibits and testimony that the parties submit. I think this database not only is valuable for us and the parties to hearing, but it also will help the board when it's considering our proposed orders, and will make it easy to set up an administrative record if we need to. Next slide, please. So far, we've held 5 hearings. It certainly was not the way we anticipated things would start out a year ago when we thought we were going to be doing in-person hearings. With the COVID-19 pandemic and the closure of the Cal EPA building to the public, we've shifted to holding all of our hearings by Zoom teleconference. It took us a little time to adjust to this process and to figure out all the details, although frankly, my staff has done an excellent job of getting everything set up. I can't take credit for it, but we do have a very, very good process now, thanks to them. Most importantly, the parties still have opportunities to have their witnesses testify, to cross-examine other parties' witnesses, and nobody has complained about the hearing process. I think we really do give everyone a fair and equal opportunity to what would be done with an in-person hearing. And in fact, I think we have several advantages over in-person hearings. We don't have to reserve hearing rooms, which may sound like a little bit of a mechanical thing, but historically they were very hard to come by, and frankly, we're starting to delay our hearing schedule. So we can set hearings whenever we want. The parties don't have to travel to Sacramento, and for some of the smaller hearings, they have been very grateful for the people who live many hours drives away, and of course, subject to COVID-19. They've been very happy to be able to participate remotely. We can record the hearings through the Zoom platform, post the recording of each hearing to our FTP site the very next day. So this contrasts the old way where it took over a month sometimes for the court reporters to prepare the transcripts and get those posted and circulated to the parties. And frankly, I think we also have more detailed and understandable hearing record because we have both the audio and the video recordings of what people say during the hearing, and we counterposed on that or proposed next to that is each exhibit or other document that the parties are referring to. So I think we have a very nice and usable hearing record. Frankly, I'll just say that's down the road. I don't know whether we'll go back to live hearings even if we can. I think in some ways, I think this process is so much superior that we'll stick with that. Well, of course, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But I've been very happy with how we've been able to do things by remote teleconference and Zoom hearings. Next slide, please. One of the many benefits of the Zoom platform is that it automatically generates hearing transcripts from the voice-activated software. The transcript lists both who speaks and the time in the recording that the person spoke. The text of the transcripts is pretty good. Some of the breaks between one paragraph and the next aren't very logical, and we would not use this as our official hearing record. But these transcripts do help us and the parties and any interested members of the public as well to flip through a transcript of a hearing quickly, locate or determine the time, hour, minute, and second of a particular passage they're interested in, and then they can go to the video recording and get right to that. So it is a nice perk. We will continue to have these transcripts generated and include them in the official administrative record, but the actual video recording will be our official hearing record. Next slide, please. So what do we have pending now? We did receive early when my office first opened 8 different matters regarding alleged failures to file timely licensee reports for 2018, licensee reports and supplemental statements of water diversion and use. We ended up holding hearings in 3 of those matters. 2 of the proposed orders have already gone to the board, and we're working on the 3rd order. The other 5 matters ended up being resolved without the need for hearings. Separate from those, we did have one combination of draft CDO and ACL complaint that we held a hearing that ended up taking several days. We actually did a site visit, site inspection as well. That hearing is in closing, at the stage the parties are preparing closing briefings, and then we will work on our proposed order in that. And then there also were 3 draft CDOs that dated back to 2010 for a variety of reasons.
Mr. Lilly, it looks like you became muted.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's because I accidentally hit my space bar. Thank you for telling me now and not 5 minutes from now. Okay, so I was just going to say we did have, there were 3 draft CDOs involving delta diversions that had been pending for 10 years, recently were assigned to our office. And the way it turns out, one of them has to be split into 3 different hearings. So those 3 draft CDOs will end up being 5 hearings, which we have scheduled for various dates in November of this year through January of next year. Next slide, please. We also are receiving permitting matters separate from the enforcement matters, 3 different water right change petitions, and then 2 petitions to amend the fully appropriated stream declaration for the Kings River. And we're in the pre-hearing process on that. On the change petitions, I'll say one of them, we've already completed our hearing and the parties have filed their closing briefs. So that's another order that we are working on. And of course, we'll get that to the board within our 90-day time frame. The others listed here are in the pre-hearing process, but our goal is to get those noticed and set for hearings as soon as we can. Next slide, please. And make sure I don't hit my space bar here again. That was a little embarrassing. So regarding future assignments, I did spend some time earlier this summer working with Eric Ekdahl, the Deputy Director for the Division of Water Rights, to develop a detailed memorandum regarding future assignments of water right permitting matters to the AHO. And we completed a fairly detailed memorandum in July, and we've posted that to the AHO webpage. It spells out 3 different tiers of projects depending on levels of complexity and levels of prior water board staff involvement. It discusses the ex parte rules and how parties or people within the Division of Water Rights will be assigned to respect those rules and yet to allow the process to go forward. It ends up being a fairly detailed process, but I think Mr. Ekdahl and I, with input from a lot of other people, frankly, which was quite valuable, have developed a pretty workable process. There also will be times in the more complicated proceedings where we need to have Division of Water Rights staff from the hearings branch and the permitting and petition sections provide technical assistance to our office, and the memo talks about that as well. So next slide, please. So what are our goals? Well, of course, one of the most important things is to have neutral and fair hearings. This is spelled out in Water Code 1110, and obviously we respect that. That is our #1 goal. This slide lists several different types of actions that we will take to continue to achieve this goal. And all of these actions are important, but what I wanted to highlight today is the issue of ex parte or individual contacts. And I've set forth a pretty rigorous rule where we try to avoid having any contacts with just some parties to a hearing where all the other parties to the hearing are not involved. We hold lots of pre-hearing conference and status conferences as necessary so all the parties can participate. We post all the communications to our FTP site where all the parties can review that, and we encourage the parties to even CC other parties to begin with, require that so that everyone is in the loop. There are some times where I'll just say someone may want to call us and have a fairly simple procedural issue like how to label their exhibits or how to upload their files to our FTP site. And I have basically told the parties, the people involved in our various hearings, I don't want them to do that. I really am being fairly rigorous about avoiding one-party communications. And the reason is that my experience over the years is a lot of those contacts or discussions that started out on routine procedural matters ended up sort of shifting over, I'll just say one way or another, into substantive issues that the other parties really would be quite interested in hearing about. So I'm trying to insist that we do everything with communications where everyone can be involved. Certainly with email, it's a lot easier than it was before we had that, and with conference calls and then video conferences if we need them. We can loop everyone in. If somebody has an important question, we can set up a conference call on very short notice and everyone can participate. It's not as efficient as a simple one-party call, but it avoids these ex-parte concerns. And so far, I'll just say, I think it's worked pretty well. It's taken a little education to get everyone to understand why I'm doing this and what I want them to do. But I think with that, it's worked very well. And I hope people appreciate the reason why I'm insisting on that. Okay, so our goal, next slide, please. Our goal for the future is also we want to have efficient hearings. And to do that, there are a couple of different things we've done. One is of course, we've hired hearing officers and technical staff who have water right expertise. And the other thing is, based on the statute, normally the entire process of holding our hearings and preparing our proposed orders is within the AHO, so we don't have the delays or inefficiencies associated with different offices or departments or divisions having to do different things. And the other thing is we can focus primarily on water right hearings. I use the analogy, it's like the doctors now that just do knee and hip replacements and don't do anything else. If you just do one thing and specialize in it, obviously you can develop an expertise in that that's valuable going forward. And then the other thing is we really do want to try to continue to focus on making prompt decisions. The statutes made it very clear that normally we have 90-day limits after matters are submitted for our adjudicatory hearings. And as I mentioned before, with Zoom, we can avoid the 1 to 2 month delay in that process after the hearing for preparation of hearing transcripts. So next slide, please. So our overall goal in the big picture of water rights is to try to help the Division of Water Rights reduce its water right backlogs, particularly in enforcement matters and permitting matters. And as I say, I think we've made a start on that. In the future, in addition, we're hoping that we can play a role to help out the division with statutory adjudications and court references as those come in. And I know there are some, at least one major statutory adjudication is potentially going to be moving forward. And I think our office can have an important role in that. And court references, haven't had a lot of those historically, but if they come up, I think we're well suited to deal with those as well. So our success in achieving these goals is going to depend both on our continued efficiency, which we will work on, and then also on the numbers of new matters that are assigned to our office. Next slide, please. So I was thinking about 2021, and that got me to thinking about 2020 and what ended up happening in 2020, which I will just say, I don't think any of us were anticipating back in November of 2019 when I started working for the board, certainly with the COVID-19 and the associated state budget cuts. So I will say we were able to adjust to the fairly major changes and unanticipated events. And I think we've, in some ways, have used that as an opportunity to improve our process, and particularly our hearing process. Considering what has happened in 2020, it's a little scary to think about what could happen that we don't know about for 2021. And of course, if it's unanticipated, there's no way we can anticipate it. But I am confident that with the staff I have on board in our office, we have had our experience and track record so far that we do have the resources and creativity to deal with unforeseen developments to continue to reach our goals or strive to reach our goals as we move forward. So next slide, please. So in conclusion, one thing that I'm pretty certain will not change in 2021 or future years is the fact that there will not be enough water in California in most water years to satisfy all demands for all purposes of use. So there will continue to be water right disputes. And obviously our office is set up and will continue to be ready to do its part to try to address and resolve these disputes. So Chair Esquivel, that's a whirlwind tour through a year with the Administrative Hearings Office and my views for the future. And I'll certainly be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lilly. You know, it has been an incredible year for many reasons, but when we look at the challenges certainly before us, just currently, but certainly into the future with climate change, our water rights system is critical for being able to adapt, to be able to have good decision making. And so I just want to thank you for your incredible professionalism, the fairness and fair-mindedness that you bring to the office, and the ban on ex parte communication, keeping a trust with the water rights community is really important here. And just having the resource to work through these processes, work through hearings that allow these tensions within the water rights system that arise because of, as you said, and rightfully so, the lack of quantity ultimately to fulfill everyone's needs. And so there's then tension and built up tension within the water rights system. And so beginning to work through those, providing the space and forum and trust, again, more specifically, for water rights holders to figure out these difficult challenges, particularly as we perhaps move into drought or otherwise, knowing that we're simply going to be seeing more as time moves on here. So the resources and again professionalism that you bring to all of this are just well heeled. It is a critical time, and again it's been incredible to see the benefits though, and rightfully pointing out the benefit of utilizing these digital platforms and what that does process-wise and improvement, and also the cost to engage with the water rights system. And I think that those sorts of improvements are just very welcomed, and including just the general process improvements of how to best handle evidence, how to best provide a consistent environment and space to engage with water rights, something that we benefit generally from. And so I just want to acknowledge again your good work and see if there's any question from any of the other fellow board members, which I'm sure there will be, but just thank you.
Thank you.
Not a question, but actually I do have a question. But before I get to that, thank you. I certainly concur with everything the chair just said. And congratulations, Mr. Lilly, in navigating your first year, given all the changes that we had to deal with. Appreciate the update very much. And my question is, it sounds like there is a great deal of potential for process efficiency in some of the things that you're doing, which is excellent, which is what we want to see. Is there also an opportunity, recognizing that your office is somewhat independent from the rest of the organization, is there still an opportunity though to exchange ideas and to share some of those process improvements. Board Member Firestone and I recently, had our own water rights hearing process that was going on, and we benefited from having Nicole Kinsey from your office as our legal counsel for that particular item, and that was great because she shared some of the things that you guys have done, some of the things that streamline processes. And so I'm thinking as we go forward, is there an opportunity to exchange that knowledge as you learn, as other board processes in the water rights avenue? Is there a way for us to ensure that we grow together, and more importantly, that we stay consistent in terms of some of our policies and processes, so that for water right holders participating in a hearing process, whether it's in your office or through another process being conducted by water rights staff with one of the board members as a hearing officer, that we ensure some level of consistency as appropriate, given, I recognize that each water right matter has its own intricacies and uniqueness. But when it comes to looking at process efficiency, and when it comes to maintaining some level of consistency and fairness, I think it'll be very good if we're able to exchange ideas and keep that knowledge base continuing amongst the entire organization.
Yes, well, thank you. And the answer is absolutely. The ex parte rules are out there, but I don't think they will limit any of the types of communications you are talking about, because the people on the hearing teams are not parties to either our proceedings or vice versa. So absolutely, we want to coordinate. And frankly, we don't know it all. We are still learning. We are certainly going to build on our experience. And if we can build on your experience or you can build on ours, that's very valuable. Our goal is to make all of our hearings more efficient, and we certainly welcome that interaction. And just on another note, I even have a month or two ago received an inquiry from one of the attorneys from one of the regional boards asking for discussion, basically our experience with running Zoom hearings. So, and basically lessons learned that we could pass on to help them. So, and of course, we're more than happy to do that. So yeah, we're all in this team together. And I mean, the main issue with ex parte contacts is obviously we don't want to have separate contacts with members of the enforcement section regarding a matter that they are involved in a hearing on. But subject to that limitation, I agree 100% with what you're saying, and certainly welcome that. There's a desire for cooperation and helping each other build on that.
Yeah, thank you both for that. And actually would invite Chief Deputy Eric Oppenheimer or anyone from Water Rights actually to reflect back on that point and anything else they might want to bring up actually. Or perhaps they don't want to say so. Vice Chair.
Yeah, I'll just fill in and maybe they'll jump in here and even interrupt. I'm fine with. I just want to join in the thanks that others have already given you, Mr. Lilly. Just really appreciate what you've done to pull things together in this difficult year. And I'm just really excited about the process efficiencies that we're seeing so far, and in the amazing staff that you have selected. I'm just really excited about the opportunity perhaps to send some meaty things your way, meaty as an MEATY. And I am just wondering, not having been involved in the water rights hearings process other than a few times. So I don't really feel that I am equipped to make specific suggestions as to certain types of cases that that we might want to consider sending your way, but would just like to hear more of your thoughts on what we could do to better utilize the office. Recognizing, it took a while for you to launch. Now that you're here, what thoughts do you have? I know you had mentioned statutory adjudication and other matters, but just want to hear some additional thoughts on that from you.
Okay, I will mention that. And I see Mr. Ekdahl is on as well, so he may have some things he wants to add as well. But it's a very good question. And of course, there are different answers to it because there are different types of proceedings. But one of the things I found, I observed and experienced early on, is several of the matters. The first time I noticed a status conference, the reaction from all the parties was, oh, we want you to put it on hold for 180 days. We don't want you to do anything. We're all busy, you know, of course, rightfully so, dealing with the COVID issues and transitioning to remote work and all that. But I said no in every single case. And I blamed all of you. I said, I've gotten directions from all 5 board members to move water right proceedings forward and not to just, you know, business as usual, let's delay. So I think it's sort of a little background for my answer to your question, but one of the things that my office is really well set up to do is setting up schedules and deadlines. I mean, the Division of Water Rights can do that, but they're in the permitting process, they're really set up in a different way. It's harder for them to do that. But I have found by setting deadlines, you know, of course, parties then have to respond to them, but we've been able to get things to move forward. Of course, some matters can settle, which is fine. But I think really it's sort of not that I have illusions of being a federal court judge, because I'm certainly not, but it's sort of the federal court model where, for those of you who have experience with that, they have what's sometimes is called a rocket docket, where you need to get things done. And of course, you'll be subject to some significant penalties if you don't. So we won't ever be that draconian, but to answer your question, when we can move things along, that helps parties settle issues. And of course, it helps resolve things as well. So that applies both to traditional enforcement matters and also to traditional permitting matters. As far as statutory adjudications, I have talked to Office of Chief Counsel, both Andy Sawyer and Michael Lawfer, about this. I think we have a very good role there for holding what I'll call mini hearings or short hearings on specific claims. If somebody files a claim and there's a dispute, we can have those. Maybe in one statutory adjudication, we might have 10 of those or 20, depending on how many disputed claims there are. And then we can have those, we prepare proposed orders, which then would be put into the composite order that the board ultimately would consider for adoption. But that is another way where I think we're fairly nimble to be able to hold hearings and get decisions out more quickly than perhaps a traditional process is. So those are just what comes to mind immediately. I don't know if that totally answers your question, but hopefully it gives some answer.
Yes, and then I recall that you mentioned that you on occasion may be seeking out the technical assistance from the Division of Water Rights. And so I'm picturing this way out into the future, say the efficiencies continue and grow. And there's, as Board Member Dodick mentioned, sharing improvements with the Division of Water Rights, and maybe you getting more ideas from the division, but you grow to the point that your shop is lean and mean and you're processing things, but there's an interest, say, to move more things your way. But with a limited staff, I suppose it could be at times, too much to handle out into the future. And at other times, you're sort of waiting for work. And so in the name of keeping things moving, could you see utilizing technical assistance from the division in order to kind of keep the flow of business? Or do you see some instances where that really wouldn't make much sense? Sort of having a wall of separation would be the better way to go.
And of course, it's going to vary matter by matter, but I think there will be many matters where the board, particularly from the Division of Water Rights Hearings Unit, which has very qualified technical staff and certainly more depth than we do. I mean, we have 2 technical staff people. They're both very good, but there's a limit to how much they can do. So absolutely, and I have talked to Mr. Ekdahl and others within the Division of Water Rights about that. Absolutely, we can coordinate with them. I think normally it's with the hearings unit staff within the Division of Water Rights. Potentially, it could be others as well. But we want to do that, as we need to, as our workload ebbs and floods, I'll say, if we get to have more than we can handle. And the other thing I'll throw out is if we get to the point where we have more work than our hearing officers can handle, we'll come to you and ask you whether any of you want to volunteer, because our statute is set up where we can work with the board members, and you know, we have to figure out who does what. But it's certainly possible we can circle back to you and ask for board members to be hearing officers to help us with our workload. We're not there yet, but down the road it could come to that, and we certainly know we'll certainly consider that if we ever need to.
Hi, and this is Eric Ekdahl, Deputy Director for Division of Water Rights. I can jump in and offer a little bit of additional detail here too. As Alan has mentioned, there's a tremendous opportunity here for moving some things in the division that, you know, historically we have tremendous backlogs. We have over 700 backlogged change petitions. We have over 350 backlogged water right applications. And getting these to the Administrative Hearings Office for exactly the things that were highlighted, setting up schedules and setting up timelines and trying to work through the issues and really bringing the issue forward so that, you know, people are, for lack of a better word, forced to actually address the issues that maybe it was okay to leave on the back burner for a while, has really been helpful. Admittedly, we on the division side have been a little bit slow in sending Alan a fair number of things. I think so far he's mentioned the 8 enforcement matters. I'm actually firewalled off there, so I can't know about the enforcement matters. But the petitions and the applications in these other matters, we've been investing a fair amount of time to try and move some of those forward. I think right now there's 3 or so listed on the website. There's a couple more that just haven't been posted yet, and we're probably a month or so away from another 3. And so we're slowly starting to trickle these things out. I think the COVID reality actually did affect our ability to move some things forward. We started a process to review all 700 backlog petitions when the hearings office first started. But then in moving to telecommuting and not having access to files, because our files are all paper records and we don't have kind of modern digital access, that process has effectively stopped, for lack of a better term. The realities of the hiring freeze within the division, it's hit us pretty hard. We have 175 PYs in the division, and as of October 1st, we had 34 vacancies, and then you layer on the 10% mandatory furloughs, the 5% redirection, and we were actually operating at about 65% staff efficiency. And that does take a tremendous toll because the workload otherwise doesn't stop. And, you know, with the fee increase that was approved recently, that's going to give us the opportunity to backfill many of these positions, but it's going to take us 6 to 8 months to do so. That's just the timelines that the Cal HR process takes. So, you know, we're slowly building that capacity back up, and we're going to double down on the need to really push petitions and applications in particular forward. Those are the things that we do have a little bit more control over how we do that. And so we've had a number of conversations internally on how we do that. How do we identify ones that are appropriate to move forward and ready to move forward? And then even some that, you know, maybe aren't ready, but we're ready for them to move forward and we just need to get them moving. Those are high priorities within the division. We're actively working on it. And the technical assistance that I think has been brought up a couple of times has already kind of been developing and actively kind of ongoing within the division. A lot of the staff, or almost all of the staff within the hearings office, came from the division. So there's already this body of kind of technical expertise, but working out the processes and figuring out how do we share knowledge in just terms of how do we process an application and how does that factor into some of the planning elements that the hearings office is going to do. You know, we're having these conversations frequently. So hopefully that provides a little bit of additional context, and, you know, we continue to push these forward.
I appreciate that. And I know the work is being done with, you know, what existing tools we have, but I think that there is also a question about, you know, is it time to procure a docket system? You know, the PUC has a better docket system, other entities that, you know, are out there, regulatory and or otherwise. You know, how do we start to invest in some of the systems here and and taking care of both needs from the Administrative Hearings Office side, but then also water rights, knowing it's that complete continuum over here, and appreciate Mr. Lilly, the commitment to seeing it as that continuum of shared resource on that side. These processes, again, the improvements that you're bringing, the thought is really critical to us just being able to churn better and have the resources to do so. So it all comes at a really critical time as we, again, continue to see the need to clear the backlog in the water rights system, but begin to work in the system more because of its link to climate change ultimately, and the ability for our water systems to adapt to a changing hydrology. So.
I had just a follow-up question on the discussion that we all just had. So there's, with the goal of trying to utilize the Administrative Hearings Office to speed things along, help us with our backlog, and thinking about how to, improve our ability to do adjudicatory matters even better and more efficiently. What I heard was that there's that the board needs to give some direction on what goes to the Administrative Hearing Office, and it seems like there's two different levels that happens. One, it seems like, was what Deputy Director, I forget, I'm so bad at titles, but what Mr. Ekdahl mentioned, which is, when the sort of statutory categories that are already, within the purview of the Administrative Hearing Office, when there are those ready or able to be moved, that there's a process of how do we move that over in those sort of already statutory categories that would be going over there. And then it seems like there's another category, which is, there may be expanded opportunities beyond those core categories. And I think, the statutory adjudications was an example. So I'm just wondering, process-wise, how it sounds like maybe there's an MOU that's developing on how to do some of this, but is there a process that we're using or developing maybe through the MOU and maybe continued discussion on how we kind of systematize that? And by that, I mean, kind of clarify, when things are ready to go to you in that first category. And then also, when it's beyond those categories, is there some direction that the board, I guess I'm also curious what has to come from the board in terms of direction itself, like ourselves, or is it sort of staff determining kind of ad hoc on individual opportunities for additional support the Administrative Hearing Office is providing beyond those core statutory categories? Probably lots of questions there, but I just wanted to understand that better.
So I'll start. I can answer part of your question, but not all of it. That under the statutes, there really are two different referral processes, depending on whether, in simple terms, whether it's an enforcement matter or something else. For enforcement matters, it really is up to the Division of Water Rights. If they issue an administrative civil liability complaint or a proposed cease and desist order, or a proposed revocation of a water right permit or license. Once they issue that, then it automatically goes to our office. No further action is needed beyond that because it's enforcement action by law. For everything else, which is primarily so far water right permitting matters, but as we mentioned, could also be statutory adjudications and other matters, those are for Mr. Ekdahl and his staff to develop. And the way we've done it now, the way he's done it now, is he develops a recommendation to Ms. Sobek, and then as executive director, she formally assigns those to the Administrative Hearings Office. So that, just to clarify, that's under the law, they're kind of two different processes depending on the type of matter. But Mr. Ekdahl may have more to say about what happens within the division. in those two
Yeah.
categories?
I'll try and describe what process we do use in at least the petitions and the application sense, and maybe even touch a little bit on the enforcement matters, just to describe kind of that process and why forecasting how many enforcement matters actually make it to the AHO is a really difficult task, but I'll come back to that in a second. The process that we look at for assigning petitions and applications is really based on staff capacity, staff workload, and their relative knowledge / experience with their existing set of projects. So we do have, I'll take applications as an example, about 350 backlogged applications. We have a item on our website that highlights whose court the application is in. Sometimes it's in our court, sometimes it's actually in the applicant's court. Things like protest resolution or completion of CEQA documents, those are oftentimes in the applicant's court, and sometimes we can drive certain elements of those forward, sometimes we can't. It's then looking at what staff, how many different applications are assigned to each staff person, the relative complexity of each one of those, identifying which one of the, let's say each staff person has between 20 and 50 applications assigned to them at any given time, then essentially recognizing if we are able to move it to the AHO, is there a specific question or set of questions that we think could be timely answered by setting up a time schedule, by driving the protest resolution? There's a number of different questions that we would ask in that analysis. But frankly, one of the biggest hurdles is just having enough familiarity with the application. If it's been something that's been mothballed for a while, it takes us a while to get back into the file room and come up to speed on the project. And so it's a kind of a constant assessment of what's ready, what's not ready. And, you know, again, admittedly, that's the process that we're trying to work on internally within the division to speed up. And I think we can speed that up. And I think there are things that we can look at. And that's what we will be doing in the near future. You know, currently right now, again, not to keep using this as an excuse or something to come back to, but the application section is down an entire unit. And, you know, that does affect the ability to kind of figure out which ones to move forward. The petitions projects, those are a little bit different just because the magnitude of the backlog is greater. And the types of questions that are raised in petitions are a little bit different. They can range from time extensions to changes in place of use to changes in point of diversion. And depending on kind of, again, whose court the application or the petition is in at that time and relative kind of knowledge about the project and its ripeness, then we make a recommendation based on that. Again, there we're looking for improvements and how we can kind of speed that up. To touch really quickly on the enforcement side of things, it's trickier there because, and again, I'm firewalled off from all of the enforcement matters except for cannabis, at which side I'm actually on the prosecution team. But the process for both of those is pretty complex even before it ever gets to the AHO. There's notices of violation, multiple opportunities to essentially provide the right holder or right claimant opportunity and due process to essentially review the claim or review the notice of violation, or review the potential water right violation. And then there's usually multiple opportunities for settlement discussions. And so even though we may have at any time a dozen or even several dozen active kind of complaint or enforcement cases going forward, it may turn out that none of them actually make it to the AHO because they have settled out or because they have resolved their issues and it's no longer an enforcement matter. The failure to file is a good example, and I won't use this year's, but I can use last year's. Before there was an hearings office, we had about 150 ACLs related to failure to file. And we moved those forward, and none of them ended up going to hearing. Even though at the start we may have had, I think, several dozen that requested a hearing. Again, through that timeline and through that process, through negotiations and settlements, all of them were resolved before there was ever the need for a hearing itself. Now, some of that now is turned over to the hearings office, and they're responsible for kind of figuring out how that occurs. But even this year, I think Mr. Lee noted that there were 8 failure to file actions, and 3 of them settled out before even getting to the hearing. And then 1 or more may have even settled out before the order was issued. So there's a continual process in trying to then forecast based on all of that workload that goes on behind the scenes and before it gets to a hearing is difficult to forecast in enforcement matters.
Thank you, Mr. Ekdahl. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, that was so helpful to both of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Do note we have 2 public speakers here, but
if I could just
please
share briefly. So thank you. I think all the questions that were asked and comments already were spot on. So I do just want to take the opportunity to say, as a matter of fact, I once was the manager of in water rights of the petitions sections. I have a profound appreciation for the 700 petitions, each and every one of them that are in the backlog. And I think Mr. Lilly and Mr. Ekdahl, the measures that you're looking at in terms of process improvement, how do we move those along to completion are spot on. And so I'm, really excited, Mr. Lilly, about everything you've accomplished with your office over this past year. I mean, frankly, I think we had a conversation at the beginning, and I gave you a little bit of a heads up that there's, it's a system that's been challenged over the years and moving like a well-oiled machine. Frankly, it's just, from what I've observed, it was stuck. It was rusted, and you've helped break that. And I think, Mr. Ekdahl, with your experience and role as Deputy Director of Water Rights, you've also helped to move that forward. And so, I mean, frankly, you've exceeded my expectations in terms of what you've accomplished over this past year. Just knowing the bureaucratic nature of what we're in and the crises that we've been dealing with, it's really been remarkable to see what you've been able to do. I'm glad you have the staff. It's still a reasonably small team that you have. 6 is not a lot. And so I think we will at some point be able to overload you, and so I guess that'll be a good day in your book, but it'll come with its own tough decisions and trade-offs to be made. So, and then one other thought is that I am the hearing officer for a water right matter right now, and have been enjoying that process. But one thing I've noticed is that it wasn't until the hearing was noticed and we actually went to schedule the hearing and had a status conference, just like you've been doing, that the protests were resolved after 14 years. And so it was remarkable how the parties in that case were motivated to actually come to a conclusion on those issues before the hearing actually happened. So, one thing I just want to mention is that we shouldn't be afraid. I don't think. It's a lot of work. I mean, we need to be thoughtful and mindful of that workload and bringing matters to hearings, whether it's to the AHO or to the board. But I think we can find it a very useful mechanism to resolve these issues, and many of which have been lingering for quite some time. So again, thank you for all the work that you've done. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Board Member McGuire. And I'll just say, for those of us who are attorneys who used to do trials, we all know that a lot of times it takes a trial date to get the parties to settle. And it's the same thing here. It's just sort of human nature, I guess. But if we're, and of course, in coordination with all of you, if we can help move things along by basically putting the fear in that people are, or putting the reality in that people either can settle or they can put on a case. But it can't just stay dormant. I think that's just a reality, and it's something we can do to help clear the backlogs.
I'd like to jump in here on this, just a couple of other thoughts. And that is, I suspect that on failure to file, it would be easier than on these water rights matters, but through time, it would be curious to see on the failure to file, the reduction in light of the fact that we're actually moving forward on failure to file, which is in years past, we've collected that information, but now that we have an ability to actually process them, it would be interesting to be able to better gauge, for example, on something like that, what the caseload, the actual caseload would look like. And is it possible to extrapolate, I know on a water rights petition or a change, that it's much more complex, but a better way to gauge in working those matters up, moving them over, whether through the division or through the office, some way to better gauge workload. I just know when I was practicing law, I'd walk into court on, any given day with a stack of files, and only so many would actually go to hearing. And we had a way to gauge that, roughly that stack would turn into about 3. Not based on my expertise because I was new at it, but based on those that had been in the office for quite some time. So I'm sure we'll get better at it. And I'm just excited about these opportunities going forward.
Yes, well, thank you. We're starting to get our first data point. So we'll get a couple more and then we can see whether we have trends. But that's a very valid point, and I'm looking forward to seeing how those trends play out.
Member Firestone.
Yeah, I just had 2 little questions for future things. One is, you mentioned how this is, I think both Mr. Ekdahl and Mr. Lilly, you mentioned that there's challenges with our paper files and that we're working on, it sounds like the administrative hearing file office is doing some scanning so that it's electronically accessible where we have for the ones that are going to your office. And, I know there's a much bigger challenge overall with Division of Water Rights. I'm wondering with that, is there, I know we are in desperate need of trying to upgrade our ERIM system and sort of public access to a lot of this data. Is there some way that in this process of, moving things to electronic files that we can do more than just sort of scan a PDF, but also just begin to kind of improve access to water rights data points that we need to build into, do a much bigger effort to improve, but I'm just wondering if there's any opportunity there in the piecemeal approach that we're doing.
I will jump in and maybe offer a more pessimistic opinion than you're looking for. Given our existing capabilities with our ERIMS system, I think the answer broadly is probably not. There's no electronic file management structure available. ERIMS wasn't built to do that. There is a way that you can store electronic files and tag them to a specific water right in ERIMS, but in doing so, those files aren't indexed or aren't indexed appropriately. Again, it's not set up to do that. And to really be able to do that, probably would argue for a pretty whole-scale revision or revamp. I think that one of the things that we need to do is make sure that the electronic files that are going to the hearings office, that we do maintain them. But again, we don't have an electronic file content management system for water rights. And so at some point, we're going to have to go and print out every one of those electronic copies and put them back in the file if it's appropriate to do so. There are huge technical and IT challenges in water rights, and just in terms of kind of bringing it back up to a even early 20th century, or not, early 21st century kind of a system. And the, I think, ongoing challenge on top of that is how do you do so in a kind of cost-effective way, or recognizing that it takes a significant investment of funds to be able to do that. And so we're faced with some challenges in trying to figure that out.
Yeah, fundamentally, it simply requires dollars and resources, really. Dollars and resources that we don't have, particularly when it comes to digitization. We've worked quite a bit with UC Berkeley's CLE Center, and there want to acknowledge Michael Koparski for really bringing good academic thought and research to what the possibilities might be. But either way you slice it, it costs dollars and significant amounts that we simply don't have. And it is going to have to be part of a discussion as we continue to do our part to caretake the water rights system, to flag that it requires resources if we're going to do well here, particularly if we're going to leverage digital services that allow us to do more with less and really start to become a 21st century state when it comes to the management of our water resources. But we have a very long way to go, and it can seem a little daunting when we just have some fundamental challenges here.
So the good news, Board Member Firestone, is we had the luxury of starting a new office. So we didn't have a legacy that went back to 1914 the way the Division of Water Rights did. So frankly, all our files are electronic. We haven't even gotten paper files because we haven't even gotten our file cabinets for them. And to the extent we can, obviously, we want to have all of our records be electronic files. Only, if we ever do have a matter where we have to assemble administrative record, I'm hoping it's, here are the electronic files. This is our record. I cringe when Mr. Ekdahl talks about printing thousands of pages of paper. I hope at least for our hearings matters, we never have to go there. I'm not blaming Mr. Ekdahl. He obviously inherited over 100 years of paperwork that I did not, but we certainly, for our office, want to keep it all electronic and completely publicly available too.
Right. That digitization of the data makes it transparent and open and quickly able to be understood. So thank you for your commitment, Mr. Lilly, in having a digital first office. And to your point, it is very different when it comes to then the inherited system that we have on the complete water rights side. But nonetheless, your digital first strategies will pay off. And again, part of our collective discussion here on how best to manage all this. So thank you. Really appreciate that.
I had one other question, unless other people wanted to talk on that point. Okay, so quickly, and this is, I think, a longer discussion, but especially thinking about now that we're, you've done a huge amount of work setting up this office. One of the things I've seen and just have I would like us to think more about is how we make the kind of administrative and adjudicatory processes that the board does, the adjudicatory processes that the board does, and now, also the administrative hearing office, just ensuring that we can make sure it's accessible to all parties and water rights holders, some of which are not as well resourced as others, and just being intentional about looking at how under-resourced tribal water rights holders, just disadvantaged communities, individuals that may not be able to have unique needs in terms of accessing the adjudication processes that we do at the board, how we factor that in and what kind of systems we can provide and build in, and thinking about how we can do that more into the future.
Well, and that's a very valid and of course very challenging comment. Of course, my first reaction is, well, we're going to post everything on the internet so everyone will be able to access it. And if your point is many of the people you're talking about may not have access to the internet. So I think this is something that you and I, perhaps some of my colleagues and you and I should have further discussions about, because it's a very valid point and it's not simple to deal with. One thing we are trying to do, we learned pretty early on, and I think this was Skylar Anderson, who has a lot of great suggestions, and this was one of them, was, let's have guides to, layperson. I hate to use the term non-attorney, but basically people who aren't as familiar with the process, let's have guides for what they need to do to participate in our hearings. Not giving them an advantage, but just telling them how it works and what they need to do. And I think that doesn't address by any means all of your concerns, but I think that may address some of them and going forward. But frankly, I think we probably need your input on how to move forward on that, because these are very challenging but very important issues.
And I think I'll just go ahead and pop in, because I think, Member Firestone, your question was a little bit broader than just our water rights adjudicative proceedings. And certainly, we've had the benefit of continuing to expand the Office of Public Participation over the last few years. And there are a number of areas where we've asked that crew to really focus, but we have not to this point had them really focus on the issue of adjudicative proceedings, which do raise some threshold challenges. They have a higher barrier of entry than our typical workshops. One of the things that we've been talking about during COVID is we've gotten much more comfortable with these technologies, allowing for electronic meetings and the ability to put up essentially remote testimony sites so that folks will not have to travel to Sacramento, even in a post-COVID world, to provide testimony to us. Adjudicative hearings present some interesting challenges because Presiding Officer Lilly has been able to conduct his proceedings electronically, in part because the governor has waived a provision of the adjudicative chapter of the APA that would otherwise allow any party to a proceeding to object to an electronic proceeding. So once we get past COVID, we'll have to see how we can adapt and use these technologies and avoid circumstances where the lowered barriers of entry that we enjoy with them are not frustrated by some of the procedural requirements that come out in the Administrative Procedures Act. So these are all things that are in the mix and that we'll continue to look to. We have always kind of prided ourselves, even if we don't always succeed, in that the boards do have a very open process. We strive to let folks of all stripes participate in our proceedings and not limit it to the legal bar, if you will. But definitely the water rights adjudicative proceedings do have a higher barrier of entry, and we really should kind of roll up our sleeves and engage OPP to see if we can help in that. And I think Presiding Officer Lilly's suggestion of a guidebook, we used to actually have a document like that, as I recall, in water rights that helps explain the process, but updating it for modern times would be a really good step for us.
And I have to be fair to my staff. It's also Kyle Woldridge. I don't want to slight Kyle because he was involved with Skylar on that, and very good comments from both of them. But yes, so we will work with all of you, and certainly Board Member Firestone, if you call me and say you want to follow up on this, we will, because it's a very valid point. And to the extent we can use your guides to help people. I mean, we want people to be able to fairly and equally participate in hearings. I mean, at the end of the day, people may not like our orders, but we want them to feel like they had fair hearings.
Yeah.
I mean, I know from my experience in court, sometimes I would feel like I had a fair hearing even if the judge ruled against me, and sometimes I would not. And that is really important. It's for the integrity of the whole water board's process.
Thank you.
I feel very fortunate that, particularly with our regional water quality control boards as well, that we do have a tremendous amount of transparency and engagement that happens. But to Board Member Firestone's point, we always have to be aware of the barriers, even to our other regulatory proceedings, which again, we really try to pride ourselves in ensuring that we help individuals understand what the discussion is, how to engage, because as decision-making bodies, if we leave people out, consciously or otherwise, then we're leaving on the table our own ability to be the best decision-making body we can. And so that engagement, lowering that bar, bringing folks to the table to discuss, understand, and participate is really the hallmark of what it is to govern in the modern world. So really thank you, board member, for bringing up the point, and Mr. Lilly, your commitment in the water rights space with us here, because it is a lot more difficult, even more than our other esoteric regulatory processes as well. So thank you. Let's go ahead and move to, we have Conrad Fisher here and Stephen Haugen to provide comment. And so we can proceed to Mr. Fisher. Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, thank you very much. Greetings to staff and board members. I'm Conrad Fisher with Water Climate Trust. And our goal is to implement water allocation laws that protect ecosystems and the human right to water. And we believe those goals are complementary and the threats to both are similar. I mostly want to express gratitude to everyone who helped establish this hearing office and the hearing process. I think it's invaluable to parties to disputes. It provides access to justice to people who otherwise could not afford it, because accessing justice in the normal court system is very expensive. And I just want to speak a little bit to overall goals and next year and beyond, as described in Mr. Lilly's presentation. One suggestion was already put out there: access to video is essential. I've been part of a hearing process where the majority of the people could not participate because it required basically a one-day drive down and a one-day drive back and $100 a night in a hotel room. So please, Governor, anyone listening, maintain this, because it is essential for low-income communities. An administrative procedure handbook, as was kind of discussed, I think one of the biggest barriers to stakeholders participating in this is just knowing basic administrative procedure and not getting shut up in the process because they don't know when they're allowed to speak or what they are allowed to say in what circumstances. It's not that hard to learn, but giving people the ability to learn. A very important one: recognize the standing of people who are not water right holders. I am a water right holder, but there are many people who are not. And they are, in fact, the most impacted by our water rights system. So to the extent possible, recognize standing of people who are impacted by water diversions and pollution, but do not hold water rights. And then finally, I would encourage anyone on this call who has discretion about what cases are taken on in the next year and beyond to prioritize cases that resolve public interest concerns, as opposed to just private party fighting private party. In many cases, two private parties fighting each other can afford to duke it out in court. But whereas there are public interest cases that need to be resolved, in many cases, it's communities who otherwise cannot afford access to justice. So I would say give priority to those. And that's my comment. And I guess if there's any follow-up discussion, I would ask those on this who are listening, who do have the discretion to decide what cases are taken in the coming year, will you prioritize public interest cases?
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Really appreciate your good comment and contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, as you heard today, we are, as a board, looking to figure out how we prioritize and what we prioritize when it comes to the workloads that we can share with the Office of Administrative Hearings here. So appreciate the good recommendation to focus on cases that provide that public interest or benefit, and knowing that, yes, there has to be some priority given the backlog, and appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Stephen Haugen.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Yes, thank you for the update, and I have no comment at this time, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for your participation today. Well, board members, anything further? I know we do have a personnel session, and this is the last item here on our agenda. But anything further here to comment on? I really appreciated this incredible conversation on this item for sure, and the previous one as well. And just thank you, and look forward to the year ahead and the continued growth of this office, and hearing an update sooner rather than later there as well, I'm sure. So
great, thank you very much.
Really appreciate it, Mr. Lilly. We are just at about 1 o'clock, and that concludes our noticed items here. We will go into a personnel session, a closed personnel session. I will go ahead and advise my fellow board colleagues, let's take a 30-minute lunch break then. We can go ahead and say we'll gather back up here at 1:30 for the closed personnel session. Anything I'm missing, Mr. Lawfer, or any other comment from board members before we wrap up here publicly for the day?
No, the only thing of interest would be, of course, it won't be on this Zoom platform. All the board members on their calendar do have the appropriate links for the closed session we'll have today.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Well, with that, this meeting is now adjourned, and we will see you all here in a couple of weeks. And just thank you everyone for your attention and time these last 2 days. See you soon.